Chapter 423. Therefore, Lin Xiao did what she thought of. She immediately put Ah Wang into the space and went back to catch zombies. She also needed to find tools such as hose and iron bars. However, the level 3 and level 4 zombies have been driven away. Therefore, Lin Xiao had to go further to catch these zombies. Only she would do something like capturing zombies to do hard labor. Lin Xiao went out of Wu Mountain and found the tallest building nearby. She stood on the roof and sensed the surroundings. When she opened her eyes, her figure flashed. She stealthily ran toward the nearest level for zombie. Her transparent figure still did not have a shadow under the sun. She stepped on the electric pole and moved toward the level for zombie. Because the houses here were built loosely and there was a large green belt, Lin Xiao felt that it was more convenient to step on the electric pole. A few minutes later, Lin Xiao arrived in front of an abandoned factory. The morgue was not big. It was a 3-story factory and a 5-story dormitory next to it. There was a gate in front of the factory. The dormitory was connected to the factory, and there were a few small houses built around it. It was barren and dilapidated. The iron gate of the gate was ajar. There were curtains hanging out of the windows on the upper floor, fluttering in the wind. In this uninhabited place, it looked very gloomy and strange. But this was the most common scene after the apocalypse. If you suddenly saw a clean and tidy building outside, then there was a ghost. Lin Xiao walked in through the half-open door and saw a figure flashing quickly on the 3rd floor of the factory. In this long-deserted place, a figure suddenly appeared. It's scary, okay? But that figure happened to be Lin Xiao's target. The zombies in the uptown were basically controlled by number 1 to number 7. The zombies inside were driven out, and the zombies outside were driven in. Then they formed a huge circle around Victoria Hotel. Therefore, the few kilometers around the hotel where Lin Xiao was, as long as there were roads or passageways, they were blocked. The zombie leaders who controlled them stared at the places where the number of zombies was low. This was the task that Lin Xiao gave them. But it was difficult to control the number of level 3 and level 4 zombies. For example, the zombie uncle only controlled 2 level 3 zombies before. As a level 4, he couldn't control it at all, although he could suppress it. But to control the level 4 zombies and make them act according to their will is too difficult. Therefore, Lin Xiao asked them to chase the level 4 away. If there were too many level 3 monsters, they would be chased away. Lin Xiao walked towards the stairs of the factory and then walked up the stairs silently. The zombies on the floor didn't know that she was coming and still didn't notice anything. After Lin Xiao came up, he stood at the top of the stairs and looked at the level 4 zombie. This was a female zombie. Judging from her clothes and her unbitten face, she was a woman in her 40s or 50s. He had been wearing the white suit for the past 5 years. It had already turned into a grayish-brown color. His suit jacket was torn, and one of his sleeves was torn off. Inside, it was a one-piece dress, the hem of which was also torn. A pair of bare feet stepped on the floor, and the pair of feet had already turned black with filth. The female zombie's hair should have been tied up, because there was a loose clip at the back of her hair. The hair on both sides of her face was messy and fell down. Lin Xiao saw that her mouth and claws were full of black blood. It seemed that she had eaten a lot of meat. The female zombie seemed to feel that someone was looking at her, and she stopped moving. Standing on the walkway of the workshop, she looked around vigilantly, but didn't find anything suspicious. She slowly walked to the window and looked out. Lin Xiao slowly walked to her side and looked at the furnishings around. The furnishings here weren't messy, but they were covered with a thick layer of dust. The things on the table were placed where they should be, and the whole table was still very clean. The stools were stuffed under the table, and there was no extra garbage on the floor. It seemed that when the apocalypse came, there was no one in these workshops, and the people probably went to the dormitory. Maybe if she went over now, she could see that there should be a lot of dried blood on the floor of the dormitory, the stairwell, and the walls everywhere. She gently walked towards the female zombie, and her invisible feet actually left a string of faint footprints on the dust. But the female zombie didn't notice this. Lin Xiao walked to her side and smelled her breath. Well, it stinks. There was no way. Almost every zombie had this smell. But this female zombie's rancid smell was heavier, and it came from her mouth. If she opened her mouth, she could probably make people 2 meters away faint. But Lin Xiao strangely found that she didn't have a murderous aura. But there was a strange murderous aura. How did this aura come from? In fact, the aura of a level 4 zombie was different. It was because of the direction of their life that they slowly changed. Just like the 2 that Xiao Lily brought. In fact, except for their ugly appearance, they didn't have a murderous aura. Because they didn't kill people and rarely fought with other zombies. But the female zombie in front of him had a murderous aura, which meant that she wasn't a guy to be trifled with. But she didn't have the kind of murderous aura that zombies who often eat people should have. What was going on? Could it be that she hadn't eaten a living person for a long time? Lin Xiao stood behind her with some doubts, crossed his arms, and used his fingers to scratch his delicate chin. However, the stains on her mouth and fingernails were probably from her flesh. Lin Xiao observed for a while, then suddenly reached out, grabbed the neck of the female zombie who was standing by the window, and then flashed into the space in the next second. Roar dash, the female zombie was scared by the sudden sneak attack and suddenly raised her hand to push away Lin Xiao's arm. Her whole body arched and quickly jumped to a safe position on the other side. She twisted her 5 palaces and fiercely roared at Lin Xiao, obviously shocked and angry. Lin Xiao looked at her and nodded. Sure enough, very fierce. Don't roar. Your roar is loud, and you can't beat me. You can't beat me. You should understand yourself. Or you can't even beat it. Lin Xiao calmly said to her, and then pointed to the zombie dog that quietly appeared behind her. When the female zombie turned around, she saw a level 5 zombie dog appear less than 2 meters behind her. She didn't know when it appeared. At this distance, as long as it fiercely pounced, she would immediately be torn into 2 pieces. Roar dash, the female zombie's momentum, all of a sudden, was completely suppressed. She looked at the zombie dog in horror, and couldn't help but retreat in the other direction. Chapter 424. And the female zombie soon found out that this place gave her a very strange feeling. It seemed that in this place, her abilities were all suppressed. Lin Xiao slightly narrowed her eyes and said to her, Yes, your ability is suppressed here. Because this is the space that I control, so you are in here. If I want you to die, you must die. Do you understand? The female zombie looked back at her in panic, and there was some disbelief in her eyes. And fear, panic, grievance, anger, and other complex emotions were all expressed. She had been very unlucky recently. Originally staying in her own territory was fine. Suddenly, she was driven out by a strange level 5 zombie. The other did not chase her, but just let her leave her place. Leaving was leaving. She couldn't beat others, so she accepted it. Later, she knew that many of her original neighbors were driven out, and she felt a little better. And her territory was occupied by some food. And being guarded by those level 5 zombies, it should be their food, or the food of the king. The female zombie saw Lin Feng and the others, and thought that they might be the zombie leaders, or the food of Qiu Lily who suppressed her aura to level 6. But she didn't expect that not long after, she was now being targeted by a king, and it had even brought her to this godforsaken place. And it could also suppress her ability. The female zombie moved her claws, and felt that her strength seemed to have decreased. And Lin Xiao also recently knew that she could now control the air pressure in this space. She finally knew why this space could restrict the ability of human psychics, because the energy in the air here was completely controlled by her and Little Man. She didn't feel anything when Little Man controlled it before. Now that Little Man left this space and went into her stomach, Lin Xiao could clearly feel the feeling of controlling this space. The energy in the air was only a thought from her. It could suppress the energy produced by the virus or the mutated psychic energy. So suppressing the zombies that were full of viruses was only a thought. She saw the female zombies panic and said to her, If you don't want to die, you have to listen to me. Otherwise, you will die now, and you will also die in the future. Because you should not live in this world. You will all be slowly eliminated. Roar, I don't understand. Who are you? The female zombie didn't understand what she meant, but seeing Lin Xiao standing at a safe distance, she didn't seem to want to attack her. The female zombie calmed down and asked Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao waved his hand at the zombie dog, and it retracted its gaze from the female zombie. He then walked toward Lin Xiao. From now on, I will be the leader here, and also the strongest person who can control you. In addition to being able to control you, I will also give you a stable life. But all of you must listen to me, or I will kill you without mercy. Lin Xiao saw the zombie dog walk over and said to the female zombie. Then she released all the breath in her body and covered the female zombie with a murderous intent. Roar dash, the female zombie's legs trembled and she knelt down in horror. Under the pressure of Lin Xiao's aura, her brain completely stopped working. When Lin Xiao saw her like this, she hurriedly retracted her breath. He had almost forgotten that this was her space, and her aura would be amplified several times. What if this level 4 zombie was scared to death? A wadash, even the zombie dog next to her was lying on the ground, looking at her with a very scared expression. Lin Xiao looked around, then raised his hand and waved towards the direction of the forest. A metal light flashed from the forest. Dang dash, a stainless steel basin appeared in Lin Xiao's hand. This was the basin that she used to fill the water for the zombie dog to drink. She walked to the lake and filled the basin with water, then walked to the zombie dog. She squatted down in front of it. What's your name? As long as you listen to me, I won't torture you, she said after putting down the basin. Then she stood up, waved her hand again, and a cup appeared in her hand. She walked to the lake and filled the cup with water. Then she walked towards the female zombie. At this time, the female zombie's body was emitting an aura of despair and fear. Get up, drink this. Lin Xiao stood beside her and said. But the female zombie just trembled a bit and didn't have any other reaction. She was still curled up on the ground. Lin Xiao squatted down impatiently, then stretched out her empty hand. She lifted her head, then put the cup next to her mouth. Drink it for me. Don't make me say it a third time, she threatened coldly. At this time, the female zombie looked up at her in fear, then stood up and kneeled on the ground. Lin Xiao let go of her, then frowned. She said to her, take it and stand up. After saying that, she stretched out the cup. The female zombie took the cup with both hands in fear, then carefully glanced at Lin Xiao. Those dark eyes without any white were full of fear. Obviously, she was scared by Lin Xiao just now. As she looked at Lin Xiao, she slowly stood up. Lin Xiao also stood up and took 2 steps back. The female zombie put the cup next to her mouth, and a corpse-luring energy emitted from the water. She froze for a moment and looked at the cup with some doubt. Because the atmosphere here was too tense, she didn't notice it. Now that she noticed it, her mind couldn't help but be attracted by the energy in the water. What is this? It seems to be delicious. The energy is also very fragrant. She looked up at Lin Xiao. This was given to her by Lin Xiao, which meant she could drink it. Lin Xiao hugged her arms and took 2 steps back, leaving her a safe distance. This made her less nervous. Seeing that she stepped back, the female zombie felt a little relieved. Then she held the cup and tried to take a sip. Then her expression became slightly happy. Then she gulped it down in one gulp. After drinking it, he chewed the cup with a crunch. Lin Xiao, leave the cup for me. Looking at the cup that was already missing a mouthful, Lin Xiao expressed helplessness. Why do these zombies love to eat cups so much? And this is glass? Aren't they afraid of breaking their teeth? The female zombie looked at her with a blank face. Lin Xiao said angrily, if you have the ability, then eat the whole cup for me. As soon as she finished speaking, the female zombie stuffed the cup into her mouth. Then he began to chew on the food. Lin Xiao looked at the blood flowing out of her mouth and couldn't help but feel a chill. She quickly waved her hand. Okay, stop eating. Is it delicious? Chapter 4:25. After collecting the female zombie, Lin Xiao put her in the number 1 small space. She told her to stay inside and not to come out. Then she went out of the space to catch more zombies. Originally, there were a lot of level 4 zombies and level 5 zombies in the zombie city. But it seemed that the level 5 zombies were scared away by Qiu Lily, so they were basically not in the upper city area. So Lin Xiao caught a circle of zombies for 3 days in a row. There were more than a dozen level 4 zombies with psychic abilities. There were all kinds of psychic abilities. There was also a rare psychic one. It was a teenager who looked like a high school student. He was about 1.7 meters tall, and his clothes were the cleanest among the zombies. Because of his high intelligence, he seemed to be a clean freak. There were no injuries on his face, and his eyes were cold and dark. There were huge dark circles around his eyes, and his face was pale and clean. His hair seemed to have been washed often, although it wasn't as clean as a human's. But he was much better than the other zombies. It could be seen that if the 2 panda eyes were removed, he was a little handsome. When this psychic zombie was caught by Lin Xiao, he didn't panic like the other zombies. Instead, he calmly negotiated with Lin Xiao. At that time, Lin Xiao saw him in a school. When she suddenly brought him into the space, the young man just silently looked at Lin Xiao for a few seconds before calmly turning his head to look around. And he quickly noticed the difference in the lake. But he didn't dare to jump directly into the lake, because the restriction made him feel a great sense of danger. And he still didn't know why Lin Xiao brought him here. Do you want a drink? Then follow me and listen to my command. I will give it to you. Lin Xiao said to him. Roar Dash, really? The teenager asked her cautiously, as if he was afraid that she was lying to him. Lin Xiao pointed to the small space and the forest. She said, just like them, as long as you work for me, I will let you drink the water here every day, but without my permission, if you dare to come near here. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Because these 2 days, among the newly caught level 4 zombies, there were some who didn't follow the rules. Seeing that Lin Xiao wasn't in the space, they couldn't resist the temptation of the lake and wanted to jump directly. But as soon as they moved, Lin Xiao immediately felt it. He dashed in and grabbed their heads with one hand. After 2 or 3 times, the other zombies saw that they were killed by Lin Xiao before they could even get close to the lake. Everyone calmed down. That's why Lin Xiao said the same thing to the level 4 zombies they caught. Roar, deal as long as I drink it. The young zombie directly agreed. He was a spirit type, so his physical abilities were lower than other zombies. Slow speed, weak power. Even if it was outside, it would often avoid other zombies of the same level. Not to mention attacking other zombies and obtaining their zombie cores. It was difficult for him to protect his corpse core. As soon as he entered, he could feel that the energy in the lake could help him level up. Moreover, it wasn't just the energy in the lake. Even the energy in the air had some effect after staying here for a long time. If he could occupy this space for himself, he could stay here forever to absorb energy. Lin Xiao quietly stared at him and suddenly said, if you want to continue to stay here, then put away those thoughts that you shouldn't have. Or do you think that you have the ability to occupy this place? With just one sentence, the young zombie's thoughts were shattered. Lin Xiao's words were not only a warning, but also a message. She could sense the thoughts of each and every one of them. Yes, I can sense the thoughts of each of you zombies. So, when your thoughts came up, I wanted to kill you directly. I want to kill you directly. Lin Xiao said, and a powerful aura rushed towards the young zombie. The young zombie finally felt real fear. He realized that the level of his kind in front of him was not only much higher than him, but also much higher than him. This made him feel like a clown. Although he didn't know what a clown was, he could still understand this feeling. The zombie dog didn't like this weak zombie, but it found that Lin Xiao talked to him for the longest time. The zombie dog jealously walked to her side. Lin Xiao looked down at it and said, "What are you howling for? Go to the side." They caught and killed all the level 4 zombies in the uptown. Only then did Lin Xiao bring them to the sweet potato field and let them all out. A group of more than a dozen level 4 zombies suddenly appeared in the open space, and they looked around in confusion. Lin Xiao put a rope on each of their hands to restrict them. The rope wasn't very strong, but if any of them dared to break the rope and escape, then she wouldn't be polite. She had already said before that if any of them went back on their words, they would be killed by her. The uptown was her domain, and no one was allowed to act wildly here. If they wanted to move freely, they must get her permission. Although the zombies were very afraid of her, they also wanted to escape. But when they saw the large amount of black fog that Lin Xiao released and formed a big circle in the air above their heads, they knew that they couldn't escape. The black fog gave them a sense of danger that was several levels higher than Lin Xiao herself. Lin Xiao stood in front of them, squatted down, and directly stretched out her claws to dig the mouse hole on the ground. "Watch me first, you guys do what I do," she said as she started to dig the hole. These zombies could understand her words, so she wouldn't use her mind to control their consciousness. For zombies like them, who had sharp claws and teeth, digging holes with claws was more efficient. The zombies didn't know what she was digging, and they all looked at her with curiosity, until Lin Xiao dug out a few big sweet potatoes. Lin Xiao threw a few kilograms of sweet potatoes in a pile, then stood up and clapped her hands, saying, "Here, this is what you want to dig out. The more you dig out, the more water I will give you." The zombies looked at her blankly. They didn't know why she wanted to dig this. Could it be eaten? Although they were puzzled, they didn't dare to be negligent. They immediately squatted down to dig holes, and after digging out the sweet potatoes, they curiously took a bite. The result was a look of disgust. Lin Xiao said to the zombie dog that was sitting on the edge of the small forest, looking like it wanted to go in, "Awang, go in and catch a big one. But don't bite the skin. I don't want to eat your saliva." She wanted to call the zombie dog to catch a mouse for her to eat. Xiadong and Xin Yuzhen, who had been digging with a hoe for 3 days, were stunned when they saw the dozens of level 4 zombies that Lin Xiao suddenly released. In the end, they saw her squatting down to teach these zombies how to dig holes. They didn't know how to describe their expressions. Chapter 4:26. Lin Feng and the others knew that Lin Xiao had explored the upper city during this period of time. After collecting resources, she went to catch zombies. They didn't know why she went out to catch those level 4 zombies. Until today, when Lin Xiao let the zombies out to dig sweet potatoes, Yuan Tianxing and the others couldn't stay calm. So that day, 2 people came to watch a group of level 4 zombies squatting on the ground and digging sweet potatoes. They curiously asked Xiao Lily, who was sitting on the tree next to them. "So she wants these zombies to dig all the mutated sweet potatoes out of the ground?" Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying stood under the tree and looked up at Xiao Lily. Then she looked at the zombies in the ground and asked. Xiao Lily sat on the tree and shook her legs. She nodded and said, "Yes." Lin Wenwen said with a strange expression, she thought of letting these zombies dig the ground. Does she want them to help out in the future? Xiao Lily looked down at her and thought for a moment before saying, "Maybe that's possible." Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying were speechless. After returning to the Hell King's base, the people knew that Lin Xiao, the big sister zombie, was digging the ground at the foot of the mountain with a group of zombie brothers. But the people from Haicheng didn't know about this, because they didn't know that Lin Xiao was a zombie, and they didn't know that the elusive Lin Xiao was originally at Wushan. They were now tearing down walls and bricks at the construction site, moving bricks and mixing cement to build the wall. The first batch of soldiers and the first batch of ordinary people had good food and work every day. Slowly, they fell in love with the fulfilling life here. And the second batch of people who came a few days ago were getting used to this kind of life. For the past few days, they even felt like they were dreaming. They wondered if they were too hungry to have such a dream. They could do what they could. Although it was hard work, it was much better than fighting zombies outside. They could eat their fill every day, although it was only 2 steamed buns and a bowl of soup. But for the ordinary people in the base who were so poor that they could only eat 1 meal every 3 days, it was already a very happy thing. So now they were doing their own things, except for work and the hotel. The other places were restricted areas and they couldn't go, because the person in charge here said that there were still many zombies around. If they messed around and provoked uncontrolled zombies, then they wouldn't go and save them. Therefore, these workers did not run around. Of course, when there were a lot of people, there were still some who were disloyal, such as the few metahumans who were hiding their abilities behind Huang Tianfei. Although they did not know the identity of Lin Xiao and the person who lived on the 5th floor, they felt that they were divine. Feeling mysterious would arouse their curiosity, and then they would want to find out who it was. Do you guys think that woman named Lu Jun, could she have been infected by the virus? At night, these people talked about Lu Jun in their dormitory. Lu Jun lived on the 5th floor. His face was no different from a normal person, except that it was a little too white. However, his eyes were too scary, and he had never heard him speak before. However, the people here didn't seem to notice anything strange about her. He still talked to her and walked with her. Anyway, he had nothing to fear from her. But isn't her son quite normal? If that woman was really infected by the virus, the people from the Netherworld King's base wouldn't let his son continue to follow her, right? Someone asked. This is also very strange. Also, when we came here, we encountered a group of zombies blocking the road. It's also very strange, don't you think? Yes, those zombies seem to be controlled by the little zombie that came out last. But they didn't attack us, and they even let us go. There must be something between these people from the Netherworld King's base and these zombies. Then should we secretly go up to the 5th floor to check? The people there are quite mysterious, just like that Lu Jun. Or should we control her and her child, then force her to tell us? You're thinking too much. She has always been with those women. It's very difficult to make a move on her without anyone noticing. Moreover, we don't know if she has any abilities. If we're discovered, it will be very troublesome. Then we won't touch her. Let's go check the situation on the 5th floor. But those people have banned us from going up. If we're discovered, we might be sent out. These people were discussing whether they should go up to investigate the situation on the 5th floor. The more they didn't want them to know, the more they wanted to know. Therefore, at around 4:00 in the morning, several figures avoided the guards in the hotel and quietly sneaked up to the 5th floor. As a result, just as they went up, a person suddenly appeared in front of them like a ghost in the pitch-black corridor. The people above forbid you to come up here. Don't you know? Lin Xiao looked at these people who were acting suspiciously and said indifferently. The few people were scared silly by her sudden appearance. They pointed at her in horror and asked, Are you a human or a ghost? Just now, they clearly didn't see anyone in the corridor, but in the blink of an eye, a person suddenly appeared. Lin Xiao was close to them and could feel their thoughts. She couldn't help but frown. Scram! Then, the few people scrambled down the stairs. Lin Xiao turned around and returned to her room. It seemed that these people should be chased out tomorrow. The next day, the door of the frightened people was knocked on early in the morning. Lin Hao stood at the door and said, According to the agreement we made, you can't go up to the 5th floor. I think you haven't forgotten. The eyes of those people were a little flustered, but they still refused to admit it. When did you say that we didn't know? And what does it have to do with us? We didn't go up. Lin Hao stood at the door with 2 other people, looking at their reactions with an indifferent expression. He had already expected that they would admit it. He said, You were caught on the spot, and you still won't admit it? Those people stiffened their necks and said, How is that possible? Don't think that we're easy to bully. You just want to use a crime to trick us. We are not easy to mess with. Lin Hao didn't want to talk nonsense with them. He said unyieldingly, Last night, at around 4:00 in the morning, the guard saw you coming down from the 5th floor. Don't talk nonsense. Pack up now and come with us. Be conscious. Don't force us to take action. Because hearing Lin Hao's words in this room, the people in the surrounding rooms all felt the different atmosphere. They all opened the door curiously and stretched out their heads to look at this side. The people in the room in the distance even walked out of their rooms, rubbed their faces with towels, and came over to watch. Seeing one person come, 2 more people came, and then one after another people came over. They quietly watched the situation in the room. Chapter 427. Those who had been the thieves last night still wanted to refuse to admit it and stay here. They were not afraid of Lin Hao anyway. They did not believe that Lin Hao could directly kidnap them. However, Lin Hao directly made his move. He took out a hemp rope from his back and said, Do you want me to tie you up and bring you out? Seeing Lin Hao take out the rope, everyone was silent. So he was serious. The few people became agitated when they saw Lin Hao's rope, pointing at him and scolding, You motherfucker! Come and tie us up. Let's see how you're going to tie us up. As they spoke, They all released their abilities and held them in their hands. The ordinary people outside the room saw this and knew that a fight was about to break out. They quickly retreated far away to avoid being involved. So you were hiding your ability levels. We said before that people above rank 3 could not come here. Looks like you guys broke the contract long ago. At this time, Du Yuanxing's voice came from outside the door, and then he walked in. He continued to stare at the few people and said, I knew that you guys are like that Huang Tianfei, not people who know their place. I've been waiting for you. You want to make a move? Let's see if a few of you rank 4 arcanists can withstand my attack. As he spoke, he raised a hand, and a ball of lightning flashed in his hand. Seeing that Du Yuanxing was an electric ability user, the few people immediately shriveled. Du Yuanxing was rank 5, and he was a special ability user. If he threw an electric ball, they might be able to dodge it for a while, but they would probably be electrocuted later. Thus, not long after, the people in the hall saw Du Yuanxing and Lin Hao bringing people to suppress the few people down. Then they saw a car parked outside the hotel entrance. Du Yuanxing pressed the few people onto the car and drove it out. He also had to return to Haiqing to continue recruiting people. On the other side, Wu Qingyue, in a military base in the mountains of Jiaxing, was hugging Wu Yueling and playing with her on the roof of a car. He watched as the people counted the food they found in the Air Force Base. Xiao Liqing suddenly walked towards him with a piece of paper. Leader, there's news from Yushan's side. As he spoke, he walked to the side of the car and handed the paper to him. Wu Qingyue turned his head and looked at him, then reached out to take it. Let me see. He opened the paper, looked at it for a moment, and then laughed. This is really interesting. Her new base is quite lively now. We've only sent the second batch of people over, and they've already been chased out. Xiao Liqing asked curiously, someone was driven out? Why? The smile on Wu Qingyue's face was deeper than usual as he said, someone is making trouble and violating the rules set by them. He was chased out because he was courting death. Moreover, I clearly said that metahumans above rank 3 are not allowed to enter. Yet these people still hid their ranks and sneaked in. Xiao Liqing looked at him in surprise and said, this is only the second batch, and someone is already thinking about it. These people are quite observant, but their method is not quite right. Wu Qingyue added, that's not all. Because the female zombie didn't have enough manpower, she ended up capturing the level 4 zombies that had rushed to the outskirts of the upper city. Can you guess what she made the zombies do? Xiao Liqing looked at him blankly. What? Wu Qingyue said with an amused expression. She made the zombies dig sweet potatoes for her. Xiao Liqing slightly opened his mouth and asked a little blankly. Ah? Dig sweet potatoes? What sweet potatoes? Wu Qingyue already knew he would have this expression, so he smiled and looked at him. Mutant sweet potatoes. And she also caught a lot of snakes to cook snake soup for the workers. Every day they have snake soup and white and tender steam buns to eat. Even I want to go with this treatment. Xiao Liqing had just recovered from the incident of Lin Xiao catching zombies to dig sweet potatoes for her. He asked with a strange expression, she dared to catch snakes for those people to eat? Those snakes should be mutant, right? How can it be so easy to find normal, uninfected snakes? Wu Qingyue said, I'm also very curious about this. But at the beginning, she said it was mutant snake soup and that drinking it wouldn't cause you to be infected. It scared a lot of people at that time, but it seems that Lin Feng and the others drank it on the spot. After discovering that there was no problem, they couldn't resist the temptation of delicious food and gradually gave up resisting. Xiao Liqing said, if it's a mutant snake, there must be a virus in its body. What method did they use to get rid of it? Wu Qingyue thought about it and said, it's probably this female zombie that did it. He knew that the female zombie's lake water had a very magical effect. It could even suppress the awakening of a child's ability. Not to mention these mutant beasts. This female zombie always brought him unexpected things. It was very magical. Xiao Liqing looked at his expression and suddenly said, then we're done here. Can we go to their base to have a look? Wu Qingyue said, of course, it won't take an hour from Jiaxing anyway. Then he hugged Wu Yueling and pointed at the messy grass dragonfly in her hand. He said to her, Lingling, let's go find her, okay? Wu Yueling's eyes lit up and immediately turned to look at him. Wu Qingyue looked at her expectant eyes and couldn't help but poke her nose. He said, "Actually, you want to find little Man, right? You don't know that she may have become a baby and is still in her mother's belly. She may not be able to talk to you anymore, so you have to wait." Wu Yueling looked at him with confusion, but she was still very happy that Papa was going to take her to find the zombie sister. Not long after, Xiao Liqing and his people loaded the supplies into the car. Wu Qingyue took the motorcade to the upper city. Lin Xiao, who didn't know that a man had caught up with her, was standing in the sweet potato field, staring at the 17-level 4 zombies working. Every day, she asked the zombie dog to bring her a live big squirrel or big mouse. Then she sat on a rock at the edge of the forest, peeling the mouse's skin and eating the meat while observing the zombies. In order to get more lake water from Lin Xiao, all the zombies learned to be obedient. They worked hard to dig holes and dig sweet potatoes. And on the big snake pit that Lin Xiao had gone to before, a person quietly appeared. Tang He looked around with a dignified expression. He didn't directly appear in the big pit. Instead, he grabbed a half-grown, mutated wild boar from who knows where and threw it into the pit. Wu, the wild boar, which weighed only 40 or 50 kilograms, rolled into the bottom of the pit, immediately stirring up a group of snakes at the bottom of the pit. Tang He stood on a tree next to the pit, closely observing the bottom of the pit. The wild boar might have been bitten by a snake, screaming and jumping around. It climbed up to the top of the pit, but it rolled down again before it was halfway up. It avoided those holes because it could smell the danger inside. Chapter 428. Just as the wild boar was desperately trying to climb out of the pit, a pair of cold eyes appeared from a dark hole below. The pair of diamond-shaped vertical pupils stared closely at the wild boar's figure. Just as the wild boar slid down again, a black shadow suddenly jumped out. It bit the wild boar and quickly rolled it up. The wild boar immediately let out a heart-wrenching scream. The giant snake rolled up its prey and bit it at the same time. It injected a large amount of venom into the prey's body. On the other hand, it slowly dragged the boar into the cave. At this time, a figure suddenly flashed down and reached for the giant snake's eye. The giant snake sensed danger and immediately loosened its mouth and tilted its head. Puff! The sound of a sharp weapon piercing into flesh was heard. Hiss! The giant snake opened its mouth wide and let out a painful hiss. Tang He's metal hand knife was directly pierced into the giant snake's flesh. The wound that was bitten by Lin Xiao and the zombie dog a few days ago had not yet healed. Now it was even more injured. The giant snake immediately struggled violently. It let go of the half-dead wild boar and rolled to the side. Then it quickly escaped, no longer caring about its prey. Escaping was more important. Tang He was thrown off by the giant snake's crazy struggle. He flipped in the air and stood firmly on the ground. Seeing that the giant snake was about to escape with a trail of blood, he immediately flashed and chased after it. The giant snake fled for its life, and at the same time, it did not choose where to go in a panic. He ran down the mountain as fast as he could. On the other side, Lin Xiao had just finished eating the wild rabbit meat in her hand. She licked her fingers. Suddenly, she stopped licking her fingers and turned her head to look in the direction of the snake mountain. At this time, Qiu Lily also flew to her side and stood on a rock looking in that direction. She asked Lin Xiao with some doubt, "Huh? There seems to be someone over there, and it's a rank 7 metahuman. Who is it? Could it be that Leader Wu ran over here?" Lin Xiao sensed for a moment and shook her head. "No, it's that robber." She clapped her hands and stood up. Then Qiu Lily said, "You stay here and watch them. I'll go over there and take a look." With a flash, he disappeared in front of Qiu Lily and the zombie dog. The zombie dog seemed to be afraid of Qiu Lily. When Qiu Lily came over, it silently moved 2 meters to the side. When it saw that Lin Xiao had disappeared, it immediately jumped up and quickly chased in the direction of Snake Mountain. It understood Lin Xiao's words. He knew she was going there. Qiu Lily looked at Lin Xiao, and then looked at the other zombies who had stopped because of Lin Xiao's sudden departure. She said discontentedly, "What are you looking at? You still need me when she's gone." Don't try to sneak away." As soon as she spoke, all the zombies became quiet again. Lin Xiao rushed in the direction of Snake Mountain. As soon as he entered the mountain, he heard a crashing sound coming from the front. Then, as the sound approached, a terrifying giant snake, as thick as her waist, rushed out from the bushes. Its body was covered in wounds caused by sharp weapons, and it was dripping with blood. The sweet smell of blood rushed into Lin Xiao's nose. Fortunately, she had eaten a lot of meat in the past 2 days. Lin Xiao quickly flashed to a tall tree on the side and saw the giant snake rushing under the tree with a gust of wind and the smell of blood. Soon a metal man caught up with it. Looking at Tang He's appearance, a layer of metal covered his skin. But it didn't affect his movements and speed at all. Because it was in the forest, Tang He didn't have any metal that he could control, so he could only turn himself into metal to attack. Tang He kicked the trunk of the tree where Lin Xiao was, and then leaped onto the giant snake in front of him. His fingers combined into a knife shape, and he stabbed the snake's body. The giant snake was shocked by his stabbing, and then it began to violently twist and turn. At this time, when Tang He kicked the tree trunk under her, Lin Xiao fiercely pounced on Tang He from above. When Tang He's knife hand stabbed the snake's body, she quickly opened her 5 fingers and grabbed Tang He's metal neck. This time, she didn't intend to stab Tang He, but directly brought him and the giant snake into the space. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, they were in a different place. Tang He was stunned. He quickly let go of the giant snake on his body, and then he turned around. There was no one. There was a lake next to this place, and there was a grassland. There was also a building, and there was a strange forest next to it. But there was no smell of people here. Because Tang He relaxed, the giant snake on the ground found an opportunity to break free from him. Then it slipped to the side, and with its broken body, it quickly crawled toward the forest. Tang He looked around in bewilderment, and his eyes were filled with shock and confusion. As he observed his surroundings, his expression suddenly changed. He looked down at his raised hands, and then he saw that the metal skin on his hands began to become unstable. One moment it became normal skin, and the next moment it became metal. Tang He felt that the energy of his ability was slowly declining, and his control was unstable. And gradually, he felt that his ability seemed to be suppressed by something. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared behind her. The figure raised his hand and aimed at the back of her head. 5 fingers closed together and stretched out, and with lightning speed, he stabbed at the back of her head. Although Tang He's ability was currently suppressed, he was still a level 7 ability user, and his perception of danger was very sharp. So when Lin Xiao appeared, he sensed it. Therefore, he quickly turned sideways and jumped out of the way. Lin Xiao's knife hand attack missed, and she quickly disappeared. She knew that now was definitely the time to kill him. Tang He turned around, but Lin Xiao was nowhere to be seen. He looked around in a panic and couldn't help but curse. "Who is it? Get out here. If you have the ability, let's do it directly. Why are you sneaking around? Come out." He was now cursing at the air, completely to give himself courage. On the other hand, he was also hoping to provoke the person hiding in the dark. However, no one responded to his cursing. Tang He turned in a circle and looked around vigilantly. His hands were crossed in front of his chest, and his eyes were staring sharply at the grass around him. But there was no wind, and there was no sound. There was only silence. And what made Tang He panic was that his ability had already dropped by 10%, and it was still dropping. Soon, he might not even be able to use his ability. What the hell is this place? Who was the one who attacked him in the dark? This attack was the same as that night, a sneak attack from behind, including the time when he was brought into this godforsaken place. It had already been 3 times, but he still hadn't seen a shadow of the other party. Chapter 429. Lin Xiao stood on a tree and closed her eyes, suppressing Tang He in the space with all her might. She concentrated the power of the space on Tang and quickly suppressed the energy in his body. This process took her an hour before she managed to suppress Tang He's ability to the level of a 5th level ability. Lin Xiao then flashed into the space and appeared in front of Tang He. "It's you." Tang He was shocked to see Lin Xiao suddenly appear. He immediately retreated to a safe distance. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "That's right. It's me." Tang He tensed up and stared at her. He asked, "You brought you into this damn place. What do you want?" Lin Xiao looked at him and said, "I didn't kill you in Haicheng last time, but you followed us to my territory. Do you think I'll let you leave this space alive this time?" Tang He heard her words and was slightly stunned. His eyes suddenly widened. "You said this is the space?" Lin Xiao nodded and said, "That's right. This person wasn't just a robber. It was because when he first appeared in front of her, he had already made it clear that he wanted to deal with Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng. Not to mention, after coming to Haicheng base, he teamed up with Yang Chao to deal with Lin Wenwen, and now he was loitering around her base. His intentions were already sinister. How could she let him go so easily? Tang He felt unwell when he heard this. No wonder his ability was suppressed to the 5th level, and it was still going down. He hurriedly tried to negotiate. "I didn't do anything to you or your people, and I didn't kill your people. You have no reason to kill me. If you let me go, I'll leave this area and never come near again. What do you think?" Lin Xiao looked at him with a cold smile. "Do you think I'll believe an ambitious robber? You've even eaten a lot of human flesh and killed more people than zombies. You're so heartless. What reason do you have to continue living?" More importantly, this terrorist had been eyeing her new base all day long. If she let him go, he would definitely gather other experts to deal with her. Lin Xiao wasn't stupid. She wouldn't do something like releasing a tiger back into the mountains. Seeing that there was no agreement, Tang He's expression immediately became gloomy. He was a level 7 expert and a bandit during the end of the world. What he lacked the least was the courage to risk his life. Therefore, when he saw that Lin Xiao was not going to let him go, he gave up the idea of talking. He spread out his hands and stared fiercely at Lin Xiao. In a gloomy voice, he said, "In that case, let me see how you can take my life." Then, from his elbows down, both of his hands turned into metal, and they were stretched and elongated. His palm turned into a sharp blade. He swung his hand, and the sharp blade made a whistling sound in the air. He said to Lin Xiao, "Come on, come if you can. Let me see what you can do." Lin Xiao just looked at him indifferently and did not move. Of course, she wouldn't fight him with her bare hands. Instead, she stretched out her hand, and a stream of black smoke flowed out of her palm. "I have plenty of ways to kill you. Last time, she accidentally let him escape, so this time, she directly brought him into the space. As long as he was trapped in her space, the other party would not be able to do anything." Tang He saw that she released a thick black fog, and he knew at a glance that it was not something to be trifled with. Although he did not have the keen senses of zombies, his eyes could see it. He saw that the black fog around Lin Xiao was increasing, and it circled around her and then rose into the sky. It slowly became bigger and bigger, and finally became a black cloud. As the black cloud grew bigger, Tang He's face became uglier. His heart quickly sank. He suddenly realized that he might not be able to get through today. Being careless and being brought into the space by the other party was already a mistake. This space suppressed his ability, but it increased the other party's ability. In fact, after an hour of his ability disappearing, his heart already had this premonition. He looked at Lin Xiao, suddenly held his breath, and fiercely rushed towards her. When he was about 3 or 4 meters away from Lin Xiao, he suddenly jumped and turned over. His 2 hands chopped at Lin Xiao. Tang He wanted to see what effect her black fog had. He thought that as long as he did not inhale the black fog, it would not have much of an effect on him. However, he quickly realized that he was wrong. When Lin Xiao saw him suddenly rushing over, she quickly reacted and retreated. At the same time, she waved her hand, and the black fog above her head instantly fell down. It completely enveloped Tang He, who was just about to chop down inside. Tang He subconsciously raised his arm to protect his head, and his whole body quickly turned into a metallic color. Even his hair turned into a steel wire. When the black fog touched his skin, a melting feeling engulfed the ability on his skin. Not good. Tang He immediately rushed out of the black fog with a bad feeling. But Lin Xiao waved her hand, and the black fog chased after him. Tang He had no chance to get rid of the black fog. In a flash, she jumped to the top of the small building and stood there facing the running Tang He. Her 5 fingers opened into a claw shape and then closed her 5 fingers. She moved towards Tang He as if she wanted to grab something out of thin air. Wherever Tang He moved, her hand would move. As for the black fog that trapped Tang He under her control, it gradually gathered towards Tang He as the center. At this time, Tang He's vision was getting darker because the density of the black fog was increasing. He was like a headless fly, unable to see the road ahead and blindly rushing around. Unfortunately, he crashed into the wall of the small building under Lin Xiao's feet with a dong sound. However, because his body was made of metal, he did not suffer any injuries. He had only knocked himself into dizziness. But when he felt dizzy, he lost control of his ability. After that, the metal skin quickly degenerated into normal skin and was then corroded by the black mist. Ah! Tang He screamed as he felt a burning pain on his skin. He suddenly woke up. He quickly controlled his ability to cover it with his skin. But when he shouted just now, he couldn't help but take a few deep breaths. Of course, what was sucked in was Lin Xiao's black mist. Whoa! Soon, Tang He covered his throat with both hands, and his face turned red. The veins on his forehead immediately popped out. His eyes widened, and his mouth opened wide. Then he knelt on the ground, bent over, and curled up on the ground. Tang He's eyes bulged as he curled up on the ground by the wall of the small building, and his 2 fingers kept scratching his throat. Ugh! Oh, he opened his mouth like a fish on land, and a strange sound came from his throat. Chapter 430. The burning pain in his throat and the suffocating feeling of being unable to breathe made Tang He roll on the ground. Very quickly, he began to beat his chest. His entire neck had already been scratched by his fingers that had yet to completely dissolve his metal ability. A lot of blood flowed from the wound, but he was not aware of any of this, for he was almost delirious from the burning pain in his chest and the burning and suffocating pain in his throat. His face and eyes were also covered by the black fog, which quickly corroded them. He opened his mouth wide and roared. His voice had lost its original tone. Lin Xiao heard the desire for relief in his voice, and she jumped down. Stretching out his claws, he bent down and ruthlessly stabbed his head. Puff! The sound of the 5 claws piercing through the skull caused Tang He's struggling movements to stop. Then, his expression relaxed slightly, and he breathed his last with his mouth wide open. Lin Xiao waved his hand to collect the black fog. At the same time, he crushed Tang He's skull with his fingers. Then he fished around and took out a level 7 energy core. She looked coldly at the black mist that had swallowed her clothes, and the flesh on her body had been corroded to the point that she looked like a person who had been skinned. Lin Xiao stretched out his hand, and a wisp of black mist seeped out. Then, more and more of them covered Tang He's body. Soon, the black mist slowly deflated. Without the protection of his special ability, the skinless Tang He was dissolved and devoured by Lin Xiao's black mist in less than 10 seconds. Only a pool of blood was left on the ground. Lin Xiao had also melted a layer of the ground with his black mist. After cleaning up the corpse, Lin Xiao looked at his claw that was covered in brain juice and blood and the energy core. Thinking about it, little man was still waiting for her to take the energy core of that snake for her to nourish. In the end, she let the snake go for a few days, but she didn't see little man come out to ask her for energy. Now he could use this adept's energy core as a replacement. But before that, she had to find the giant snake that was hiding in the forest in her space. She suddenly felt that this guy was very unlucky. Just by looking at the scars on its body, she knew that Tang He had abused it badly. Lin Xiao walked to the side of the water bucket by the lake. He took a ladle and filled it with water to wash his hands and the energy core. Then, he poured the dirty water on the grass before putting the energy core into his pocket. She turned and walked towards the forest. She walked into the forest quietly and walked deeper into the forest. In Lin Xiao's space, There was no grass on the ground. On the clean soil, there were a few leaves piled up on the ground. She walked for about 1,000 meters before she saw the king cobra at the edge of the forest in space. It might have been banging against the edge for a long time, but it still couldn't break through the white fog. Thus, he hid here. It was also possible that he had used up all of his energy and his wounds were hurting. In addition, it had used up all its stamina to escape, so the king cobra had coiled itself into a pyramid and buried its head inside, not moving at all. Even if it sensed Lin Xiao approaching, it just moved its body. But it didn't stick its head out. Instead, it revealed a gap, and two eyes could be seen through the gap. Strangely, it saw Lin Xiao. However, he wasn't that scared anymore. It seemed that there was nothing more desperate than when he was being chased by Tang He. Lin Xiao stood 3 meters away from it, looking at it with her arms crossed. She asked, "Do you want to go out? If you do, I'll send you out." The cobra seemed to be stunned for a moment. It didn't expect Lin Xiao to talk to it. Although it didn't understand, it meant that this two-legged monster was not going to attack it now. It slowly pulled its head out of its body and looked at Lin Xiao curiously. Lin Xiao asked again, "Do you want to go out?" The cobra still looked at her curiously. Lin Xiao understood its eyes, but she couldn't communicate with it. She sighed and tried to take 2 steps towards it. Sure enough, when it saw the cobra, it immediately raised its head vigilantly, but its eyes flashed with fear. Lin Xiao looked into its eyes and stopped, speechless. "Come on, you're a snake. A cold-blooded, ruthless, ferocious, and aggressive predator. Look at you now. You're not ferocious at all. Your eyes are like a little lamb." It was obviously afraid of being beaten up in the past 2 days. First, it was beaten up by her and the zombie dog, and now it was beaten up by Tang He. This guy was the only snake that was in such a miserable state. She said, "You're the worst snake I've ever seen. You're so big. Why are you so weak?" The cobra looked at her strangely. What was she talking about? Lin Xiao took another step towards it, and it immediately raised its head high and opened the 2 glasses on its neck in a fan shape. Seeing it like this, Lin Xiao immediately stopped. She knew that although the snake was in an aggressive state, it just wanted to scare her so that it could protect itself. It was afraid of her, but it also wanted to pretend to be fierce. But its eyes completely betrayed it. Lin Xiao could only take 2 steps back and said, "Okay, I won't go near you." She felt that if she were to get any closer, this guy would either explode and slip away to the side, or he would definitely torture himself. Lin Xiao thought about it and decided to let it stay in the space for the time being. This would prevent it from running around outside and possibly running to the construction site. Maybe she could continue to communicate with it. After thinking it through, she directly left the space. Then, she saw a dirty and ugly big dog sitting under the tree where she had disappeared. Seeing Lin Xiao come out, the zombie dog immediately stood up. Maybe it was its nature, but it now knew how to wag its tail at Lin Xiao. Although it didn't wag too much, it just moved the tip of its tail. Lin Xiao looked at its dirty hair seriously and suddenly said, "After I absorb this energy core, I'll come out and shave your hair. You must shave it." "A what?" The zombie looked at her blankly. Lin Xiao then took it to the sweet potato field. When they reached the side of the sweet potato field, Qiu Lily immediately flew over from the stone there and landed beside Lin Xiao. "How is it? Where is that person?" Lin Xiao looked at the zombies who continued to work in the field and observed that there were still people. Then she replied, "He's dead. I brought him into the space and killed him." Qiu Lily looked at her in surprise and asked, "Huh? You can actually kill a level 7 paranormal? Just how strong are you now? Why do I feel that you are still a level 6 king, but you can already kill a level 7 paranormal?" Lin Xiao looked at her and shook her head. "I can't kill him with my strength. I need to use a trick." Saying that, she pointed at her head. Chapter 431. Qiu Lily looked at her curiously. "What method did you use?" Lin Xiao said, "I can now control the pressure in the space, so I took him into the space when he wasn't paying attention." Then I used the space to suppress his ability and killed him. Hearing this, Chiu Lily was amazed. Your space can kill people. Then if anyone dares to provoke you, you can just pull them into the space. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, no, the space can only restrict the ability of a superpower. Furthermore, it took me more than an hour to suppress his metahuman, even though I was a rank 7 metahuman. If there's another stronger one, I probably can't suppress it, and it won't be easy to take him in. First of all, I have to do it when the other party is unprepared. If the other party is prepared, then it will be difficult for me to approach. Chiu Lily looked at her and was still amazed. But you can kill people above your level. That's already amazing. Oh, by the way, isn't there that thing in the lake? Lin Xiao shook her head. Little man is not in the lake now, so she can't help now. Chiu Lily looked at her doubtfully. Not in the lake. Where did she go? Lin Xiao looked at her and said, she went somewhere else. Chiu Lily widened her ruby-like eyes and looked at Lin Xiao from head to toe. You went somewhere else? Isn't she a local product of your space? Lin Xiao looked at her funny. What kind of metaphor is that? But it seems to make sense. But she is really not in my space now. Chiu Lily asked, then where did she go? Lin Xiao shook her head. Well, I'm not sure. She couldn't tell her that little man was hiding in her womb now, right? Turning into a zombie baby? Huh. Then when little man was born, would it be a human or a zombie? She really didn't pay attention to this question. Chiu Lily didn't pester Lin Xiao on this question. She changed the topic and said unhappily, this is our place from now on. We can't let strangers come close. Lin Xiao smiled and said, I've already dealt with it. We're not easy to mess with. He sneaked into our territory. How can we let him go free? Chiu Lily nodded in agreement. Yes. In the future, no one is allowed to enter without permission. Lin Xiao nodded and gestured to the zombie dog. Come here. The zombie dog looked at her blankly, but it still walked over. Chiu Lily also looked at her blankly. Lin Xiao called the zombie dog to the side of the grass. Then with a shake of his hand, a pair of steel scissors appeared. What are you doing? Chiu Lily stared at the pair of shiny scissors and asked. Lin Xiao said, I'll cut its fur. Maybe it'll look better after that. Chiu Lily nodded knowingly. Oh, it does need to be cut. Lin Xiao told the zombie dog. Okay, stand here and don't move. Then, she bent down and started to cut off the zombie dog's dirty and bleeding fur from its body bit by bit. The zombie dog stood still and let her cut its fur. Chiu Lily stood at the side and said, you should wash it after you cut it. It stinks. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, that's what I plan to do. Chiu Lily watched Lin Xiao spend half an hour to cut off the zombie dog's fur. She didn't even let go of the tail. She cut it until it was bare. Only the fur on its head was left, and its whole body was bare. At first glance, he looked like a male lion, if the dog's mouth was a little shorter. Then, Lin Xiao took out a bucket from her space. It was filled with lake water. She used a ladle to wash the zombie dog's body, washing off all the dirt on its body. Then, Lin Xiao pointed at the bucket that was still half filled with water and said to the zombie dog, go in and stay there. Come out when I tell you to. Awooh. The zombie dog cheered and took a few steps back before running over and leaping. Plop! He jumped into the bucket. The water inside splashed out again. The zombies working in the field looked back enviously. They really felt that they weren't even as good as the dog. The dog could bathe in energy water, and they had to work hard for a whole day to get a cup to drink. After Lin Xiao finished, she looked at the time and shouted to the zombies who were still looking for sweet potatoes in the field. Okay, it's almost time to call it a day. Gather, gather. The zombies immediately stood up and walked towards her. Xie Dong and Xin Yuzhen clapped their hands and stood beside her. Lin Xiao threw out a hemp rope and let the zombies catch it. Then, she took them into her space. She stood next to the bucket by the lake and waited. When the zombies entered the space, they consciously ran to a cabinet in the small space and took out their own cups. That shelf was the storage cabinet that Lin Xiao found. The squares on it weren't big, only half the size of the automatic storage cabinet in the supermarket. But there were a lot of squares, about 30 or 40. On it were the cups that Lin Xiao had collected for the zombies. After the zombies took the cups, they all stood in front of Lin Xiao in a row. They waited for Lin Xiao to take a ladle and distribute water to them. In the first few days, Lin Xiao distributed according to the number of sweet potatoes they dug. After a few days of digging, they dug all the sweet potatoes in the field. Except for the normal sweet potatoes growing at the foot of the corn, the mutated ones were all dug up. But Lin Xiao still gave each zombie a cup as a guarantee. But Lin Xiao also told them that if there was no work to do, they would stop giving them water. Then he would stop giving them water and wait for work to be done before asking them to do it. They could only drink water when they were working. At night, when they returned to the hotel, Lin Xiao would also give Meng Meng and the other zombie leaders water to drink. She would also give them a bath once a week. Every time she saw the old man take a bath, Lin Xiao would observe him for a long time. That night, Lin Xiao sat cross-legged on the bed in her small room in her space. She wore a military vest and pulled the hem of her clothes down to her chest. Her beautiful waistline and sexy waistline were exposed. The waistline of her pants was also pulled down a bit, revealing her flat belly. She took the washed level 7 energy core and placed it on the palm of her hand, pressing it against her belly. Soon, she felt a cold and hard energy slowly surging into her stomach. The first time she absorbed the energy of a metal ability user, it turned out to be this hard feeling. And it was cold. She frowned a bit unaccustomed but continued to endure, because she felt that the energy was being absorbed by her belly. She knew that it wasn't her who was absorbing it. It was Little Man. Knowing that Little Man could absorb it, she was relieved. She just didn't know to what extent this level 7 energy could make Little Man grow. Chapter 432. After a night of continuous absorption, only 1/9 of the energy in the core in Lin Xiao's hand had been consumed. But Little Man refused to absorb it in the morning, and she sent a message to Lin Xiao. Mama, 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 Little Man can't eat for now. You absorb the rest. Little Man is going to sleep, and, if possible, leave a little bit for Little Man. Just a little bit. Then she disappeared again, probably going to sleep. But just as Lin Xiao was about to absorb the energy core, she appeared again. Oh yes, mama. When you absorb it, go to the bottom of the lake. The energy in the lake can help you filter out impurities. After saying that, she disappeared again. Lin Xiao was stunned. She still had to go to the bottom of the lake? There was a bonus effect? But she knew that Little Man wouldn't lie to her. Reminding her was for her own good. Lin Xiao got off the bed and tidied up her clothes. He took the energy core and went downstairs. Then, he walked towards the lake. When she reached the lakeside, she stood beside the chair where she usually put her clothes and prepared to take off her clothes. When she was about to take off her clothes, she suddenly stopped and looked back to see a group of 4 zombies hiding in a small space. Lin Xiao was speechless. Should she set up a room next to the lake where she could directly go into the water? The bottom of the room was connected to the bottom of the lake, so she could put her clothes on it. Otherwise, she would be surrounded when she went into the lake or came up from the lake. Lin Xiao looked at the zombies and said, "Turn around, don't look. If you don't turn around, think about how you want to die." The zombies were stunned. They didn't understand why she didn't let them look. But they still turned around obediently. Who knew what would happen if they didn't turn around? She already told them to think about how they wanted to die. Lin Xiao saw that they were still very obedient, so she released a black fog from her hand and let it surround her body. Then she took off her military vest and pants and put them on the chair next to her. At the same time, she pulled off the rubber band that tied up her hair, letting her shoulder-length hair fall down. When she looked back at the zombies, she saw that they were all well-behaved and didn't peek. Then she took the energy core barefoot and went into the water. After getting into the water, she dived. Because she could control the energy in the water, she felt that her buoyancy and resistance in the water had disappeared. She felt as if she was floating in the air, as light as a feather. Soon, she reached the bottom of the lake and stood at the bottom. Holding the energy core, he closed his eyes and began to absorb it. Along with the cold energy coming from her hand, Lin Xiao felt a gentle energy coming from her other hand. It was the energy in the lake. Then, the 2 energies did not directly reach her head, but began to rotate and merge at the position of her heart. Then, after the fusion, another kind of warm energy was emitted and began to surge toward her brain. So it was like this. No wonder Little Man wanted her to go into the water. Then, why didn't he let Little Man come down when she absorbed it herself? Isn't that better? Or could it be that Little Man herself had the source energy at the bottom of the lake and could directly filter out Tang He's energy? That was possible. As Lin Xiao thought about it, more and more energy appeared. Gradually, some of the filtered energy began to spread throughout her blood vessels. Gradually, Lin Xiao felt that her whole body began to heat up. The temperature slowly rose, then fell, rose again, and fell again. When the temperature rose, it was like 40 degrees of hot water. It was very hot, and every time the temperature reached a high point, the pause would become longer and longer. Then it would fall again, and then it would fall very, very low, so low that her whole body was cold. The feeling of absorbing energy this time was different from when Little Man helped her absorb it in the past. This feeling of alternating hot and cold was enough. At this time, another group of people came outside the base. They parked their car on the road 20 meters away from the zombie horde. They all looked at the zombie horde that was standing still in the same place with a look of amazement. As soon as the zombie horde saw living people coming, they immediately turned to stare at them and roared. Their ferocious appearance was as scary as before, but they would not move their feet and rush toward these people. "Hey, boss, they're not coming over." Zheng Xiaoyan got out of the car curiously and leaned against Lu Tianyi, looking at the zombie horde that was blocking the road. Lu Tianyi said with a mysterious look on his face, "Have you forgotten whose territory this is now? She has a way to control these zombies." Zheng Xiaoyan and the others did not know that Lin Xiao was a zombie, but they all felt that Lin Xiao was very powerful and mysterious. Ever since Lin Xiao saved them from the zombies, they had always felt that Lin Xiao was very powerful. She has a way to control zombies? So awesome. But now the problem is, how are we going to get there? Wait? Looking at Lu Tianyi's expression, they knew that he was prepared to wait here. Lu Tianyi spread his hands and said, "Otherwise, how do you want to get through? You can walk over and see if they will let you pass." Zheng Xiaoyan quickly shook his head and waved his hand. "No, I don't want to. If you want to go, you should go, boss." Lu Tianyi crossed his arms in front of his chest and shrugged. "I don't need to go, because I know they will definitely attack me." Everyone looked at him in disdain. "Then why did you ask us to try? Do you think we are brainless?" But after waiting for half an hour, no one came. An hour later, no one came. "Do you know that we are here? If they don't send someone to pick us up, are we going to keep waiting here?" The people were impatient and asked Lu Tianyi. Lu Tianyi shook his head and said, "How would I know?" Everyone pushed Lu Tianyi and asked, "Boss, why don't you try the situation? Maybe if you walk over, one will come out." Lu Tianyi glanced at them and felt that waiting like this was not a solution. After thinking about it, maybe he could go over and take a look. "Okay, I'll go over and test it out." After waiting for an hour, the zombies on the other side saw that there was food in front of them, but they could not go over and bite them, which made these zombies very anxious. Lu Tianyi slowly approached that side, while watching the zombies' reaction. As long as the other side made any movement, he would immediately retreat. Just as Lu Tianyi walked less than a few meters, a small figure suddenly jumped down from the top of the building next to him. Roar dash, the little zombie's head and face were covered, but it did not prevent him from making a sound to warn others. For example, these humans in front of him. If the boss hadn't warned him not to make a move, he wouldn't have stared at them for so long. But now these people actually wanted to pass without any experience. Of course, he couldn't let him pass. So the little zombie jumped down from the top of the building. Looking at the little zombie's dark eyes and a pair of red eyes, Lu Tianyi's scalp was a little numb. Could someone tell him that this guy was the gatekeeper boss here? Chapter 433. Looking at the sudden appearance of the zombie leader, Lu Tianyi was a little confused. This meant that he was not allowed to go over. What should he do? Of course, he couldn't fight with these zombies. It would be bad if he provoked them. Besides, they weren't here to fight. It wouldn't be good to fight in someone else's territory. Lu Tianyi bit the bullet and tried to say to the little zombie, Can you help me inform your boss that someone is looking for me? Although he felt that it was a bit stupid to talk to a zombie, and he didn't even know if the zombie could understand him. But what else could he do? He was also very desperate. Lu Qianni thought with a complicated mood, and then on the other side, he felt that it was very novel. Before meeting Lu Tianyu, who became a zombie, he never thought of communicating with zombies. He wanted to kill zombies as soon as he saw them. The little zombie didn't answer him. I think he should only understand the words of that female zombie. Suddenly, a voice with a faint smile came from behind Lu Tianni. Lu Tianni turned around and saw a handsome man in a camouflage military uniform with a smile on his face standing 3 meters behind him with a child in his arms. Leader? Lu Tianni subconsciously looked behind him, but he didn't see anything. He only saw his car and his people. At this time, the sound of a car came from afar, and then he saw a few big cars coming from afar. Why are you here? Lu Tianni asked him strangely. Wu Qingyue pointed to his daughter and said, I brought her to find her stepmother. Wu Yueling looked at Wu Qingyue and suddenly smiled. She liked this name. In the future, she would call her Big Sister Zombie and Stepmother Zombie. Lu Tianni, Zheng Xiaoyan, and the others behind him looked strange and surprised. Lu Qianni felt strange because he felt that their leader gave him the identity of a big sister, and his actions were quite fast. Zheng Xiaoyan and the others were surprised. This was the first time they heard their leader say that he wanted to find a mother for the little princess, and he actually came here. They always thought that Meng Yu, who silently followed him, would be the one to be the little princess's mother. And now it didn't seem like it. Lu Tianni pointed to the little zombie and said, If he doesn't understand, then what should we do now? We've been waiting for an hour, and no one has come out. Wu Qingyue smiled lightly and said, That's easy. Just scare him back. As he spoke, he walked in front of Lu Tianni and released his aura. Roar dash! The little zombie immediately stood up, with fear roared at Wu Qingyue. Then, he turned around and disappeared in a flash. Lu Tianni was speechless when he saw that the guard was scared away by the release of his aura. He said, Leader, that's not very good. Wu Qingyue turned around and shrugged at him with a smile, saying, This is the most effective method, and I don't need to do anything. How nice! At this moment, a white shadow suddenly flew over and stood on the electric pole by the roadside. He said to them, Why are you here? It doesn't look like you're here to send workers, right? Everyone raised their heads to look at the girl standing steadily on top of the telephone pole. She had 2 long strands of hair dancing in the wind. She was dressed in a white chiffon princess dress, and her ruby-like eyes were staring at them curiously. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, Didn't the workers just deliver it a few days ago? We just passed by and came to take a look. Qiu Lily waved her hand and said, Go in. Then they saw the group of zombies slipping away one after another, quickly making way for them. Qiu Lily said, If you are looking for Qiao Qiao, she is not here for the time being. With that, she turned around. He left in a flash. Wu Qingyue and Lu Tianni were left bewildered. Who is Jojo? Who cares who she is? Let's go in first. Wu Qingyue waved to the people behind him and shouted, Let's go. Then his motorcade rumbled past, followed by the off-road vehicles of Lu Tianni and the others. After they drove over, the zombies quickly gathered again. After Qiu Lily returned to the hotel, she said to Qin Yuding and the others, who were sitting in the hall and looking at some reports, The leader of Sea City Base is here. We've already entered the zombie circle. After saying that, she turned around and skipped towards the stairs. Lin Feng and the other 2 were sitting in the hall. They were calculating their current speed and how long it would take to build a wall. How many more people were needed to shorten the completion time? Hearing Qiu Lily's words, they were all stunned. After Qiu Lily left, they came to their senses. The leader of Sea City? Which one is it? Leader Wu? Lin Feng guessed. Qin Yuding nodded and said, It should be him. Recently, he has indeed been collecting supplies for this winter outside. I didn't expect him to come in this direction. Yuan Tianqing asked curiously, Maybe he has been collecting supplies around Hangzhou, or maybe he passed by here and came to say hello. The other 2 nodded and agreed, It's possible. As they spoke, they heard the sound of a car coming from outside. The three of them immediately stood up and walked towards the gate. They went out and stood on the steps of the gate, watching several off-road vehicles and trucks drive over. Wu Qingyue and the others came down from the off-road vehicles. Yuan Tianqing's handsome face was full of smiles. He said to Wu Qingyue and the others who were walking over, "Leader Wu, why didn't you tell us in advance if you were coming? We could have gone out to welcome you. How did you get past the zombies? Don't tell me he killed our zombie horde?" Although they knew that Xiu Lily went out to let them in, Yuan Tianqing and the others were still very curious about the situation. Lin Feng moved aside and gestured inside, saying, "Please come in." Then, he led them in the direction of the sofa. After Wu Qingyue carried Wu Yueling in, he put her on the ground and led her to the sofa. He said aloud, "I just passed by and came to see how your base is now. I didn't think it was necessary to inform you, so I came directly." Lu Tianyi, Xiao Liqing, and the others followed Wu Qingyue into the hall. They looked left and right, and when they didn't see Lin Xiao, they quietly stood behind Wu Qingyue. At this time, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying also came in from outside and saw Wu Qingyue and the others. Although they were a little surprised, they only took a few more glances and walked in from the front desk. "Why are they here?" Lin Wenwen asked curiously. She and Long Qingying both smelled of sweat, and the back and collar of their t-shirts were soaked. Her neat short hair was also half dry, and there was a half-wet towel hanging around her neck. Long Qingying's clothes weren't as sweaty as hers. Obviously, she didn't exercise as much as Lin Wenwen. The two of them had been out running for more than an hour. Lin Wenwen had persisted from the previous 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and 30 minutes to the current 1.5 hours. Chapter 434. After running, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying would return to the room to do some exercise, and Long Qingying would watch over her every day. Anyway, Yuan Tianqing wouldn't let them work at the construction site now that they were in the base. Not to mention whether they could do it. Even if they could, he didn't want them to affect the male workers there. Imagine in this apocalyptic world with a 1,000:1 ratio of men to women. What would the men who hadn't tasted women for a long time think if they saw two young girls wandering around in front of them every day? In any case, they wouldn't be calm. Therefore, they would help out in the dormitory, in the canteen, or in the hotel's cleaning. When there was nothing to do, they would usually stay in the room. The less they went out, the less likely they would cause trouble. Therefore, when there was nothing to do, the two would choose to run around the hotel every day when the workers were at work. Running in the morning, working out in the afternoon, and then practicing combat. Even Long Qingying was surprised that she could persist for so long. She thought that Lin Wenwen wouldn't last more than a few days. Unexpectedly, she gritted her teeth and endured. The current Lin Wenwen was indeed different from the previous Lin Wenwen. Her entire temperament had changed from the previous gentle and quiet Lin Wenwen to a bit of a tomboy. No wonder Miss Liu could see it that day. She replied, "I don't know, but look at the truck outside. It should be passing by to collect supplies. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come all the way here." Lin Wenwen nodded, thinking that it should be the case. The two went up the stairs and then came to the corridor. Long Qingying looked at her and asked, "Aren't you going to rest today? Your injuries haven't healed yet, right?" Lin Wenwen shook her head resolutely and said, "It's fine. I've adapted to these injuries now. And it's not serious. It's nothing. I'm afraid that if I rest, my perseverance will be broken. So I have to continue." Her body was covered with flesh wounds. Although it was painful, they would heal in a few days. If it was in the past, she would probably make a fuss or let herself take care of them and not do anything. Because she didn't know the hardships of the army, she didn't know how Lin Xiao and Lin Feng had persevered when they first entered the army. But recently, she found out because she asked Wei Jingxin and the others about their training in the army. Therefore, she suddenly felt that her elder sister was working very hard. But if it wasn't for her and her brother persevering in this team, their family might not have been able to escape this calamity. It would have been difficult for them to have their whole family here. After all, there were more soldiers who survived after the apocalypse. This time, the base had been destroyed, Lin Xiao had died, and they had been on the run. It made her deeply aware of the doomsday rule of the law of the jungle. She didn't blame Lin Xiao for protecting her so well in the past 5 years. She only blamed herself for being too short-sighted. Therefore, she was now tensed up, training her body and learning combat skills. She knew that as long as she protected herself and didn't let her family worry, she could make them feel more at ease. Long Qingying said, "All right then, I'll help you remove the extravasated blood tonight." Lin Wenwen suddenly laughed, turned around, and hugged her. "Thank you. Qing is the best." Long Qingying pulled her away in disgust. "You're sweaty. Don't hug me. It's so hot." Lin Wenwen smiled and let go of her. The two of them walked into their own rooms. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water from the table, the two of them came out with cups of water. Then he walked towards the end of the corridor and entered a room at the far end. It was an empty room. There was nothing in the room. There were no tables, sofas, or beds. Only 2 or 3 chairs were left in the corner. The two of them put the cups on the chairs, and then Lin Wenwen hung the towel around her neck on the back of the chair. Then Lin Wenwen began to do horse stance. That's right, it was the horse stance. Although the posture made Lin Wenwen feel awkward at first, she felt better after seeing Long Qingying do it with her. Sometimes some things really needed 2 people to do together. That way it wouldn't be so awkward. After Wu Qingyue and the others sat down and chatted for a while, Yuan Tianqing took them to the construction site to see the wall. After seeing it, Wu Qingyue pretended to ask casually, "Why don't I see your Miss Liu? Does she also appear and disappear unpredictably on your side?" Yuan Tianqing smiled. "Oh, her. She's been busy training zombies to farm." Wu Qingyue also smiled and said, "I know about this. That's why she often stays at the sweet potato field. Doesn't she care about the construction of the wall on your side?" Yuan Tianqing said, "Oh, we have a division of labor. She can't avoid the responsibility here. Leader Wu, you know about her training zombies, so you must know about this too." Saying that, he looked at him meaningfully. Wu Qingyue nodded. "I know, but I'm not very clear." Yuan Tianqing looked at him with a smile. "In fact, besides visiting the location of our new base, the other purpose of you coming here is to find her." Wu Qingyue also looked at him with a smile. "Well, you saw through me. Then I have no choice, I'll just say it. I'm here to find her." Yuan Tianqing glanced at him with a smile and said, "Then why don't you go to the other side of the mountain to find her? Why are you here for so long?" Wu Qingyue smiled. "I'll be embarrassed if you say that." Yuan Tianqing looked at him silently for a few seconds before replying. "You're the one who makes me speechless." Well, he was defeated. The other party was indeed thick-skinned. The few people following behind him were speechless. These 2 men looked a bit silly now. Xiao Budian, who hadn't seen Lin Xiao after walking around, patted Wu Qingyue's shoulder anxiously. Wu Qingyue stopped and turned to look at her. "What's wrong?" Xiao Budian just looked at him eagerly. Wu Qingyue immediately understood and nodded with a smile. "Okay, then let's go find her now." Xiao Budian nodded hard at him. Yuan Tianqing said to him, "So you already had a plan when you brought Xiao Lingling over to help us take care of her last time?" Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, "Oh no, you misunderstood. It's just a coincidence. Lingling really likes Miss Liu. It's just that I wasn't very interested in Miss Liu before." Yuan Tianqing said, "So now you're very interested in her?" He looked at Wu Qingyue, who was exuding an aura of wanting to poach their people. Although he really wanted to drive him away, he knew he couldn't. Wu Qingyue just smiled this time. He didn't deny it, but he didn't say anything either. Lu Tianyi, who was behind them, whispered to Lin Feng, "Our leader is ready to poach your people. Aren't you going to think of a way to stop him?" Lin Feng heard the conversation between the 2 people in front and guessed, "How?" Chapter 435. Lu Tianyi looked at him and said, "Are you going to watch him kidnap her?" Lin Feng looked at him strangely. "Why do I feel like you're not on your leader's side? Aren't you happy that he kidnapped our people?" Lu Tianyi looked up at the sky and said, "No." Of course he wasn't happy. He couldn't say that his sister, who had just changed her appearance, was going to be kidnapped before he could even warm her up. Back at the hotel, Yuan Tianqing took Wu Qingyue in the direction of Wushan. But when they arrived, they saw an empty piece of land that had been dug up. There wasn't a single zombie in sight. In this piece of land, apart from the corn stalks, the rest of the land was dug out with small hills piled up beside the holes. Wu Qingyue looked at the land and asked, "What was this place originally? Why is there corn? Didn't she dig up the corn?" Yuan Tianqing looked around and didn't see any zombies. He didn't know where Lin Xiao went. He replied, "Oh, I heard her say that the corn wasn't infected and could be eaten. That's why she kept it for seeds. These are all the holes for the mutated sweet potatoes." The sweet potatoes underground were all dug up and swallowed by her black mist. Wu Qingyue nodded and asked curiously, "But are you sure this land can be planted? It's already mutated soil. If you plant normal plants, won't they mutate too?" Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, "I'm not sure either. Miss Lu said she would take care of this, but we don't know what method she used." Wu Qingyue put Wu Yueling down and held her little hand. Looking at the holes, he said, "I guess she wants to use that kind of water." Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, "That's possible." Wu Qingyue looked around again and asked, "Then she's not here now. Where did she go? Did she go to catch zombies again?" Yuan Tianqing had to say, "I'm not sure. Seems like she's not here. Let's go back to the hotel first. If she's not here, I don't know where she is unless she shows herself." Wu Qingyue had to take Wu Yueling back. Wu Yueling wasn't happy when she didn't see Lin Xiao. She hugged Wu Qingyue's head and buried her face in his neck. Wu Qingyue felt her mood and said with a smile, "Don't worry. Dad will find her." When they arrived at the hotel, Yuan Tianqing asked him, "How many days are you staying? Is it okay not to go back to the base?" Wu Qingyue said, "I've been out for so many days. 2 more days won't make any difference." He had to see the female zombie first before he went back, right? He didn't know what the female zombie had become. His memory of her was still the touch of her hand during the passion that day, and the way she closed her eyes and furrowed her brows as she endured it. Now that he was here, he really wanted to see her sober, and he didn't know how she would face him. From her sneaking out of the Sea City base, he knew that she definitely didn't want to see him. At least for now. He wondered what her expression and reaction would be if she knew he had come to the base. Thinking of this, the smile on Wu Qingyue's face deepened. Yuan Tianqing looked at him and couldn't help but remind him, "Leader Wu, your expression right now is like that of a fox calculating its prey." Wu Qingyue just smiled at him, and a light flashed in his long and narrow eyes. "Thank you for the compliment, Yuan Tianqing." He was really thick-skinned. In the end, Wu Qingyue didn't know that he had waited for 3 days, and he didn't see the female zombie. On the other side, Lin Xiao also didn't know that she had stayed in the water for 3 days. She didn't stop until she felt that there was only one layer of energy left in the energy core in her hand. She opened her green eyes at the bottom of the water, and a bright green light shone from her eyes. Then, when her eyes flashed, she shrank back. She looked at the energy core in her hand and then moved her hands from top to bottom. Her whole body bounced up to the surface of the water. Then, she came out of the water. Lin Xiao looked at the surface of the water and then moved her arms to swim to the shore. When she reached the shallow water, Lin Xiao stood up and waved her hands. A black mist flowed out. Then, it formed a circle around her body just like before when she went into the water. The black mist covered her body and also covered her beautiful figure. She walked up barefoot and then picked up the clothes by the side of the chair and started to put them on. Because they felt her appearance, the zombies in the small space all stretched out their heads to look at her. Lin Xiao put on the loose military pants and tight military vest, and then sat on the chair and bent over to put on the military boots on her feet. She exposed her slender neck and white arms, and her wet long hair dripped a few drops of water pearls from her neck. After putting on her clothes, she stood up. When she was ready to go out of the small space, suddenly there was a zombie dog's roar from the side. Oh, and there seemed to be some kind of vibration coming from there. Lin Xiao and the zombies in the small space all turned their heads to look, and then all the zombies quickly retreated into the small space. Then, after a few seconds, they saw a huge snake quickly rush out of the forest, and then it drilled into the 1-meter tall grass. And behind it was the naked zombie dog. It quickly chased after the black snake and also jumped into the grass. Then Lin Xiao saw that in the tall grass, it quickly moved from one side to the other, and then from the other side to the other side. And it was followed by the excited zombie dog jumping like a rabbit. The zombie dog jumped 4 or 5 meters away and 2 or 3 meters high. It happily chased after the giant snake. Lin Xiao said, "This dog has become a zombie, but it can't change its active character." She walked over, and her eyes followed the two animals from left to right, and then from right to left. The zombie dog that was happily chasing suddenly found Lin Xiao, and immediately turned around and jumped towards her. "Oh, whoa." Lin Xiao curiously looked at it rushing over, and then it ran around her. She asked, "When I went down, you actually didn't bite it to death and eat it?" The zombie dog sat on the ground in front of her, and then looked up at her, although it didn't know what Lin Xiao was talking about. Lin Xiao looked at it, and then she lifted her legs and walked into the grass. She walked towards the place where the shaking had calmed down, and then she saw the weak snake lying in the middle of the grass. It was a giant snake that was too lazy to even coiled up. The giant snake's head was lying on the ground, and its huge body that was more than 10 meters long was stretched out. Its tongue was sticking out of its mouth, and then it softly rested on the grass. When it felt Lin Xiao coming over, it just raised its eyelids and looked at her. Then it continued to lie down with its eyes closed. Chapter 436. For 36, Lin Xiao looked at the snake with surprise. Was it going to ignore her? She took 2 steps towards the giant snake. She thought that the giant snake would ignore her, but it suddenly rolled and burrowed into the bushes at the side. Lin Xiao watched the snake quickly wriggle away, leaving only a shadow of its tail before disappearing. However, this grassland only covered an area of 1 or 2 acres. It was very difficult to hide such a large body. As the snake still didn't want her to get close to it, Lin Xiao had no choice but to give up on catching it and sending it out of her space. Suddenly, she had an idea. In addition to the new snake, there were also zombies and zombie dogs in her space. The mice and rabbits from before seemed to have disappeared. They weren't eaten, were they? Zombies didn't eat mutated animals, but the zombie dog did. She closed her eyes and spent a short while sensing the surroundings, then opened them again. She turned and glanced at the small building with surprise. Well, that gray rabbit was much smarter than she had thought. She didn't know when it had hidden in her building. As for the rats, they were hiding in a nest under the bushes. Those little creatures were still safe. Lin Xiao turned and walked out of the grass, then said to the zombie dog, "How long have you been chasing it? It's so tired, but you didn't catch up with it? Did you go easy on it?" "Oh, well." The zombie dog looked at her with surprise. "Didn't you tell me not to eat it last time? Why are you talking to it like you're underestimating it now?" Lin Xiao looked at the dog and said, "I told you not to eat it last time. Is that why you didn't eat it? Were you chasing it for fun, just now?" "Oh." The zombie dog immediately howled at her excitedly. Lin Xiao looked at it speechlessly and said, "Do you know how to find toys? I thought you don't play with toys." The zombie dog wagged its hairless tail and looked at Lin Xiao eagerly. Lin Xiao made eye contact with it, then sighed and nodded. "All right, I'm taking you out now. But if you want to go back to the hotel with me, you have to stay by my side." "Oh, whoa." The zombie dog immediately howled at her happily. "You don't look like a real German shepherd, do you? Tell me, isn't your father a husky? Your mother is a German shepherd." Hearing Lin Xiao mention her parents, the zombie dog looked at her with confusion. Lin Xiao didn't say anything else to the snake, but turned back to glance at the snake, which had been silently sneaking into the woods from the other side of the grassland. Although she couldn't see it, she could clearly feel its movements. She turned around and prepared to leave with the zombie dog. However, she saw the strawberry field and vegetable field, which had been ravaged. Lin Xiao was speechless. She stared at the zombie for about 10 seconds, then slowly lowered her head to look at the zombie dog. When the zombie dog noticed that she was staring at the strawberry field, it couldn't help but have a bad feeling. It immediately made 2 steps backward to keep a distance from Lin Xiao. Once Lin Xiao raised her foot, it would run away immediately. Lin Xiao raised both hands and moved her 10 fingers. Then, she clenched her teeth and said to the dog, "Do you want me to kick you 10 times? Or do you want me to kick you 10 times? Tell me." Oh, whoa. Hearing her words, the zombie dog obediently approached her. After that, it turned around and left its butt to Lin Xiao, then closed its eyes. Lin Xiao raised a foot and kicked the dog while saying, "Don't ever approach that field again. Do you understand?" The zombie dog, which had been kicked forward by her, immediately got up and turned around after hearing her words. Lin Xiao pointed at the strawberry field and said, "Over there. I don't plan to approach it. You." After pointing at the strawberry field, she turned her finger and pointed at the zombie dog. Whoa. The zombie dog pressed its ears. As Lin Xiao raised a hand, the vine that was left by Viney showed up in her hand. She swung the vine and coiled it around the zombie dog's neck. She tied a knot, then held the dog's hand and flashed out of the space. Once out of the space, she was still in the sweet potato field. She glanced at the potato field, which was now filled with holes, then dragged the zombie dog toward the road. She made a few steps forward, then paused abruptly. She hesitantly raised her head to sniff at the air. Then her expression changed. Why is that man sent here?" If that was just Lin Xiao's illusion, the little one's scent made it real. She popped her eyes and turned to the hotel with a sullen look on her face. "No way. Wu Qingyue is here? And they even came to this side of the land. He's not here for me, is he? Why is he here? He's not here for me to take responsibility, is he?" That time, Viney was the one who set him up, and she was the one who was tricked. However, Viney was her subordinate. Adults should take responsibility for the mistakes that children made. What should she do if that was true? Thinking about that, Lin Xiao felt very uncomfortable. It was all Viney's fault that she was in such a mess. If Wu Qingyue was really here for an explanation, how was she supposed to take responsibility for that? Was she supposed to marry him? Bono marry him? Lin Xiao suddenly felt that she was thinking too far ahead. That shouldn't be possible. However, if Wu Qingyue was here to blame her, she needed to figure out a way to deal with him. She believed that nothing good would come out of his visit. So, she decided not to show up. Therefore, Lin Xiao dragged the zombie dog back into her space within a few seconds. Ow wow! The zombie dog, which had just gone out, came back in. Immediately, it couldn't take it anymore. "There might be an enemy out there," said Lin Xiao. "He'll kill you and roast you. I'm doing this for your own good. Stay where you are." "Oh, well, where's the enemy?" The zombie dog looked at her with confusion. "I'm not lying," said Lin Xiao. "I said that you'll be roasted, so you will. Do you believe me? Do you want to go out and give it a try?" The zombie dog shook its head and didn't know what to say. After that, Lin Xiao smiled and said, "Good boy. All right, stay here. Remember, don't approach that piece of land." While speaking, she loosened the vine rope around the zombie dog's belly, then turned and disappeared. The zombie dog was left sitting there with a sullen face. Lin Xiao turned herself invisible and sneakily approached the hotel. Arriving at the hotel, she saw Wu Qingyue's truck parked by the road to collect supplies. She had no idea how long he had been there. She had no concept of time when she was absorbing the energy at the bottom of the lake. Lin Xiao sneaked into the hotel, sniffing and sensing the scents in the hotel. Apart from Wu Qingyue and the little one, even Lu Tianyi was there. What was he doing here? Tour? She went up to the 4th floor of the hotel. Wu Qingyue and Lu Tianyi were staying in an empty room on the 4th floor. She walked to Wu Qingyue's door and looked at the 2 soldiers by the door. She found that they weren't Xiao Liqing, who was always by his side, but 2 strange soldiers. As Lin Xiao put her ear on the door and prepared to listen to what Wu Qingyue and the little one were talking about, she sensed that someone was coming out of the door. Chapter 437. For 37, she gave a slight start, wondering if Wu Qingyue knew that she was here. She hurriedly stepped backward, then flashed to a corner of the hallway and stuck an eye out to look at that area. Then, the soldier by the door turned and opened the door for Wu Qingyue, then walked out with Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling was led away by him. She pouted her lips and looked a little angry. Lin Xiao could tell that she was very unhappy. As she got close to Lin Xiao stopped talking. As Wu Yueling approached, she sensed her thoughts. It turned out that the kid wanted to see her, but she had been here for days. She was in a bad mood because she didn't see her. As Wu Qingyue was coming, Lin Xiao didn't dare to linger. So, she hurriedly moved backward and watched Wu Qingyue coax Wu Yueling to go downstairs. "All right, Ling Ling, can you smile for Daddy? Look at your pouting little mouth. You can even hang a shirt on it. She'll be back soon. You like her so much. Don't you want Daddy anymore? Be good if you can't see her. If she can't see us, we won't go back, okay?" Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. "No, you have to go back. What are you doing here?" Seeing Wu Yueling's unhappy little face, Lin Xiao's heart softened slightly. It seemed that the kid's autism symptoms would become obvious when she was unhappy. Lin Xiao thought that Wu Yueling's autism had improved a little. But just now, she felt that something wasn't right from the bottom of her heart. It wasn't obvious, but it made Lin Xiao care about it. She crossed her arms and watched Wu Qingyue and the others go downstairs with confusion. She carefully thought about the trace of violence that flashed across Wu Yueling's heart just now. She felt that the kid was suppressing something. It might be caused by her bad mood. No matter what, Lin Xiao had a bad feeling about the little one's sudden fierceness. She had a feeling that something bad would happen in the future. Since the little one wanted to see her, she decided to meet her in secret. As long as that man didn't know. She thought for a moment, then suddenly had an idea. She flashed across the air and entered her space. She looked at the zombie dog, which was still lying on the ground unhappily, but didn't say anything to it. Instead, she walked to the grassland and picked a few long blades of grass, then sat by the grass and started weaving. While weaving, she continued to pluck the grass. Big and small, long and thin, he picked a handful and put them there. As she continued to weave, she came up with a small green figure. Then, she tore the soft leaves into threads and weaved them into the heads of the little people. It looked like a head of soft, long hair. Not long after, a straw doll appeared. Lin Xiao drew eyes and mouth on the doll's face with a pen. Then, he looked at it and nodded in satisfaction. After that, Lin Xiao soaked the grass doll in the lake water, then shook it dry. Only then did he walk to the top of the small building and search for the rabbit all over the house. Soon, she pulled the fat gray rabbit out from under the sofa. She sat on the sofa with the gray rabbit in her arms and put the grass doll on the table. "Actually, if I let you out, little Munchkin will be happier. But if I let you out, you will be exposed too quickly. That's why I can't let you go." When Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling went downstairs for dinner, Lin Xiao left the windows open. So, she climbed in through the window and found Wu Yueling and Wu Qingyue's bedside. The father and the daughter slept together. Wu Qingyue wouldn't let his daughter sleep alone in a strange environment. Besides, Wu Yueling didn't want to sleep alone in a strange room. She might get sick if she stayed there for too long. However, judging by the current situation, the disease might break out very soon. If Lin Xiao didn't show up soon, she eavesdropped on the conversation of the others outside and learned that Wu Qingyue and the little one had been here for 3 days. She didn't think that Wu Yueling's illness would break out during those 3 days. That made her feel a little strange. According to what Cheng Wangxue and the others said, Wu Yueling didn't want to play with Lin Xiaolu and the others. Lin Xiaolu wanted very much to play with her, but Wu Yueling ran away every time. So, Lin Xiaolu gave up. Therefore, Wu Yueling had been following Wu Qingyue closely these days, never leaving his side. She would be unhappy if she didn't see her, and she would feel inexplicably agitated when she wasn't happy. After a couple of days of agitation, she suppressed her emotions. Lin Xiao sensed that she was thinking that way. She walked to Wu Yueling's side of the bed, then took out the straw doll and put it under her pillow. After that, she left. She went back to the 5th floor and found Xiao Lily's room. She took out a pen and a piece of paper, then wrote a note and put it on her desk. After that, she turned and slipped away. She returned to the sweet potato field in Mount Wu, thinking about how to grow crops in that area. After returning to the sweet potato field, she entered her space and looked at the strawberry field, which was damaged by the zombie dog and the giant snake. She helplessly walked into the field and squatted to pull out those broken strawberry plants which were no longer able to grow. While she was cleaning the strawberry field, Wu Qingyue brought Wu Yueling back to the room. His daughter's unhappiness made Wu Qingyue feel helpless. If the female zombie didn't show up by herself, he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. If the zombie didn't show up, even he wouldn't be able to find her. If that didn't happen, he would have to figure out a way to make her come out. As soon as they entered the room, Wu Yueling left him and ran into the bed in the inner room. Ling Ling, you haven't taken a shower yet. Wu Qingyue wanted to remind her, but she ignored him completely. He felt that she was back to the time when she was seriously autistic. Wu Qingyue knew that Ling Ling's condition was going to act up again. On one hand, she felt that he had lied to her, so she was anxious. On the other hand, she was looking forward to seeing him, so the longer she waited, the more disappointed she became. As Ling Ling's father, how could Wu Qingyue not know about his daughter's current condition? So, he had to figure out a way to find that zombie as soon as possible. At that moment, the door was pushed open, and Xiao Liqing walked in. He said to Wu Qingyue, "Chief, the 5th floor is the zombies' territory indeed. Normal people aren't allowed to go up there. But according to Lu Jun, Mississippi Lu hasn't come back in the past few days. I've also checked. Apart from that field, there's a large snake pit on the mountain near Mount Wu. Sit down and tell me," Wu Qingyue said to the couch beside him. Xiao Liqing sat down and continued. "There should be a large mutated snake in that pit. Judging from the traces, the snake should be as thick as a woman's waist. But we don't know where it is now. I don't think it's in the snake pit. Also, many traces of fighting are found in the pit. Those traces are all new. I think some people have been there recently, and it wasn't the same group of people." Wu Qingyue said with a strange look. "Did she go there to catch a snake? Last time, she ate a thigh-thick snake." "Yeah, that's possible," said Xiao Liqing. Chapter 438. 438. While Wu Qingyue was listening to Xiao Liqing's report, Wu Yueling pouted and climbed onto the bed. Then, she wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down. She felt very uncomfortable in her heart, very uncomfortable. She felt as if something was going to rush out of her head, and that made her very uncomfortable. However, she felt that her father had been lying to her for so many days and wouldn't let her see her zombie sister. She was very unhappy and very angry. As she angrily laid down on the blanket, she suddenly felt that something was poking her head from under the pillow. Wu Yueling got up with confusion, then sat on the bed and looked at the pillow. Then, she reached out a little hand and took the pillow away. She saw a little green doll under the white pillow. It was delicate and pretty. Wu Yueling's eyes glowed. It was made of grass. She knew who made it. She happily picked up the grass doll, and the sullen look on her face disappeared. She stared at the grass doll and fondly stroked its green hair. Suddenly, she thought of something and hurriedly looked around. She spent quite a while looking around, but didn't see the person she was looking for. Wu Yueling dropped her head with disappointment, but soon, her attention was attracted by the doll in her hands. So, she sat on the bed and started playing with the doll. Also, the doll smelled so good. It smelled like Zombie's sister. No, it was her little mama. Last time, Daddy said that he wanted her to be Ling Ling's little mama. Outside, Wu Qingyue asked Xiao Liqing, "Can you ask the people on the 5th floor how to find her? I feel that Ling Ling isn't in a good condition today. We need to let her see that female zombie as soon as possible." "Yes, sir," Xiao Liqing responded immediately. Xiao Liqing responded, "I'm going to ask them now." Hearing that Wu Yueling wasn't in a good condition, Xiao Liqing felt that the situation was a little serious. For the sake of the little princess's psychological condition, he decided to find her as soon as possible. On the roof, Chiu Lily was sitting on a corner, swinging her legs and looking at the sky. Suddenly, Lu Jun walked up with a man. Lily, he said that their chief wants to see Lin, Mississippi Lu, for something urgent. Xiao Lily lowered her head to look at Xiao Liqing and said, I told you the other day that Xiao Xiao wasn't here. You insisted on coming in to find her. She should be absorbing the energy nucleus of that level 7 robber in her space now. I don't know when she'll come out. Level 7 robber? Who is it? Xiao Lily glanced at him, then stood up from the corner of the building. She patted the dust off her skirt, although there wasn't much dust, because after she sat down, she had already blown away all the dust in this place. She jumped down and said, He's the level 7 superpowered man who escaped from your base. Are you talking about Tang He? Xiao Liqing asked with surprise. Xiao Lily tilted her head and said, Oh, so his name is Tang He. Yes, it's a metal type, but he's already dead. He was killed by Jojo. Is he really dead? Xiao Liqing slightly popped his eyes. Xiao Lily nodded. Xiao Liqing quickly digested the news, then remembered what he came here for. When will Mississippi Lu show up? My young Mrs.'s condition is not very good. Only she can help. By the way, who is this Xiao Xiao you're talking about? Is she Miss Lu? Xiao Lily glanced at him, then nodded and responded, It was her. Your miss? Was it that little girl? What happened to her? Xiao Liqing nodded, but didn't say anything. I know, said Lu Jun, that kid is autism. But it's true that she likes Mississippi. Lu might be the reason why she came here this time. But the fact that she didn't see Mississippi. So, she might have an attack. Xiao Liqing nodded and said, That's true. My young miss was looking forward to seeing Mississippi Lu. Sadly, we haven't seen her yet. Xiao Lily thought for a moment, then said regretfully, But we really can't find her. So, we can't help you. Xiao Liqing sighed and said, All right then. Sorry for bothering you. While speaking, he nodded at Xiao Lily and Lu Jun, then turned and walked downstairs. They've been asking about Jojo these days. It turns out they want her to help them, said Xiao Lily to Lu Jun. I was wondering what they were going to do. So, that's what they came for. Do they want Xiao Xiao to help them cure the little baby? Lu Jun shook her head and said, I'm not sure. She's an autistic kid. It's going to take some time to cure her. So, that's why she doesn't play with Tong Tong and the others, said Xiao Lily. Lu Jun was a mother, so she could understand why Wu Qingyue was so anxious about the child. She sighed and said, But we don't know when Lin Xiao will come out. The nucleus of a level 7 superpowered man contains a huge amount of energy. I don't think it'll take long, said Xiao Lily. Xiao Xiao is at level 6 now. She's still at level 6, but she can absorb energy quickly. Besides, she has Viney to help her. Lu Jun nodded. On the other side, Xiao Liqing quickly told Wu Qingyue that Tang He was killed by Lin Xiao. What? Wu Qingyue looked at him with surprise. She killed Tang He? Are you sure? Has her strength reached the point where she can kill a level 7 expert by herself? I don't think that Mississippi Xiao Lily in a white dress likes to lie, said Xiao Liqing. I think she's telling the truth. So, Mississippi Lu should be absorbing energy in her space now. That's why she hasn't shown up yet. Wu Qingyue nodded and said, If only that were the case. I thought she was avoiding me on purpose. Why is she avoiding Chief? Xiao Liqing looked at him with surprise. Wu Qingyue glanced at him as he gave a mysterious smile and said, Make a guess. Xiao Liqing rolled his eyes and said, Guess if I'm guessing or not. Wu Qingyue glanced at Wu Yueling, who was sitting on the bed and playing with something. You'll find out later, he said. While speaking, he stood up and walked into the room. Before he could walk in, Wu Yueling suddenly lay down again. Then, she wrapped herself up in the quilt and looked like a bundle. Wu Qingyue walked over and sat beside her, then gently patted her quilt. Ling Ling, Daddy just heard the news. Your zombie mom is busy upgrading in her space, so she doesn't have time to come out and see you. Ling Ling, can you wait with Daddy for a while? He thought Wu Yueling wouldn't talk to him, but the quilt stayed quiet for a few seconds, then suddenly wriggled. She stuck her little head out of the quilt and looked at him with a pair of watery eyes. Wu Yueling nodded at him, then quickly crawled back into the quilt. Wu Qingwei was a little surprised. Eh, why is she suddenly in a good mood? She was unhappy just now. Could it be that when he said the words zombie mother, it made her happy? Did she like that word? Chapter 439. For 39-inch, aren't you mad at Daddy anymore? He asked with surprise. This time, Wu Yueling didn't come out of the bed, and neither did she make any noise. Wu Qingwei thought for a moment, then said, "Why don't you get up and take a shower first? If you stink, your zombie mom won't like you anymore." After saying that, he sat there and waited for Wu Yueling's reaction. As he expected, Wu Yueling stayed silent for a few seconds, then finally moved. After that, she spent a short while under the blanket. After that, she lifted the blanket and sat up, looking at her father expectantly. Wu Qingwei looked at her and raised his eyebrows. He couldn't help but feel that he was going to be abandoned by his daughter. Wu Qingwei didn't move, but Wu Yueling got up from the bed. After that, she put her arms around his neck while pointing at the bathroom. Wu Qingwei nodded and said, all right, let's go now. The water is hot anyway. We can wash you, little pig." While speaking, he carried Wu Yueling and stood up, walking toward the bathroom. He didn't notice that Wu Yueling, who was lying on his shoulder, had her eyes fixed on the head of the bed. A beam of light flashed across her eyes. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who had been working in her space for less than 2 minutes, suddenly summoned a group of zombies out of the small space. Come on. You haven't had any work to do these days. Come and do this." Hearing that there was work to do, the group of zombies had their dark eyes glowing. Work meant that they would have water to drink. They were now like addicts. All day long, they hoped that Lin Xiao would give them work so that they could get water to drink. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to see the lake all day long. They were craving for water too. However, they didn't dare to go to the lake by themselves. Not to mention the possibility that Lin Xiao might suddenly show up and crush their heads. Even the zombie dog could crush them with a single claw. So, he had been waiting the whole time. Finally, Lin Xiao gave the order. Once Lin Xiao finished talking, those zombies rushed out excitedly like some kind of creature. She spent a few seconds looking at them, then said, "You don't look like zombies at all." 17 level 4 zombies stood in a straight line before her, waiting for her to give them their tasks. Lin Xiao named a few people and said, "You guys come out?" Then, he instructed them to start cleaning the strawberry plants. On the other side, a few more people were selected. He walked over to the pile of potatoes and taught them to pick out the sprouted ones. Lin Feng and the others didn't eat all the pumpkins and potatoes she had picked earlier. Instead, he slipped out a small pile and placed it there. Pumpkins can be stored for a long time, but potatoes can't. Also, Lin Xiao asked Mrs. Lin and the others to leave the pumpkin seeds when they cooked the pumpkin. Lin Xiao had soaked those pumpkin seeds in the lake water. Soaking the seeds in the lake water did not cause them to rot. Instead, the seeds slowly absorbed the energy in the water, and their vitality became stronger and stronger. Some of the seeds had already grown thin roots in the water. Lin Xiao felt that those seeds would grow quickly if she put them into the soil. Moreover, she didn't soak the potatoes in the water, because even if she didn't soak them in the water, they would absorb the air in this space and slowly grow sprouts. Normally, potatoes couldn't be eaten once they sprouted, but Lin Xiao found them to be edible. The sprouts were less than 10 centimeters long. Lin Xiao asked the zombies to pick out the sprouts from the potatoes and put them in the baskets on the side. She had collected those baskets from the factories when she was out hunting zombies a few days ago. She found that the potatoes at the bottom of the pile had already sprouted. Their sprouts were pressed down by the ones on the top of the pile, so they couldn't grow properly. The ones around them had already grown crookedly. Lin Xiao let the spirit-powered zombie lead the way to distribute the potatoes, because she knew that the spirit-powered zombie boy was better at understanding things than the others. She put a lot of baskets on the other side of the pile, including the sprouted ones and the unsprouted ones. After that, Lin Xiao prepared to take those sprouted potatoes out of the space and plant them in the field outside. However, she still needed 2 people to loosen the ground outside before planting the potatoes. During the past few days, the zombies had only been digging for sweet potatoes. The untouched soil was still hard. She thought for a moment, then decided to let Xiaodong and Shin Yujin loosen the soil. They wouldn't get tired anyway. They could loosen the soil from morning to night, so it would only take them a couple of days. The 2 of them were in the hotel at the moment. Should she sneak back to the hotel and bring them back? Thinking of the hotel, she thought of the little one and the strange feeling in her heart. She wondered if the little girl would like the grass doll that she made. Thinking of the little one, Lin Xiao was a little worried. She thought that she should go back and check on her again. As long as she didn't show up, Wu Qingyue wouldn't be able to do anything to her. While thinking, Lin Xiao glanced at the zombies in her space. They had all been assigned tasks, so she said to them, "Go back to the small space when you're done. I'll come back to distribute the water for you." The group of zombies turned and glanced at her. After that, Lin Xiao flashed out of the space and sneaked back to the hotel. It was late at night, but Lin Xiao didn't dare to show her face. After all, some people would be able to sense her vibe without seeing her. Only by turning herself invisible could Lin Xiao's vibe disappear. She quickly returned to the hotel and knocked on Xiaodong's door first. Soon, Xiaodong opened the door. However, there was no one outside. As he prepared to close the door with confusion, a hand pressed on his shoulder and pushed him into the room. Xiaodong immediately figured out who it was and took 2 steps backward. He took a few steps backward, then closed the door. After that, someone dragged him into the space. Lin Xiao stood in front of him and said, "Tomorrow, you and Shin Yujin will go to the field to loosen the soil. I'm going to plant those potatoes." She pointed at the pile of potatoes which had been divided by the zombies. Xiaodong paused briefly, then nodded. "Go wait in the small building. I'll go and bring Shin Yujin in," said Lin Xiao. After saying that, she prepared to flash out of the building. However, Xiaodong suddenly reached out a hand to stop her. "What's wrong?" Lin Xiao turned and looked at him with confusion. Then, she saw Xiaodong take out his notebook and pen, write something on it, and hand it to her. He wrote, "Wu Qingyue wants your help. Why do I feel that you're avoiding him?" Lin Xiao said awkwardly, "You notice that too? All right, I really don't want to face him now. But I guess he wants my help because of the little one. I'll sneakily go there and observe her later." Xiaodong nodded knowingly. After that, Lin Xiao turned and left the space. She headed towards Shin Yujin's room. However, before she arrived at the door, she stopped by the door with a weird look. Then, she crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame, not preparing to knock on the door. She didn't want to disturb the 2 in the room. Chapter 440. That's right, in addition to Shin Yujin, Shin Yuding was also in Shin Yujin's room. She really wanted to know what they were doing. Were they just sitting there and chatting? But it wasn't right to pry into other people's privacy, so Lin Xiao didn't stick her ear to the door. But Shin Yujin was now a zombie, and her whole body was infected with the virus. She couldn't have any contact with Shin Yuding. Even if Shin Yuding didn't care, Shin Yujin would. So Lin Xiao guessed that they were just sitting there and chatting and keeping a distance. Well, the scene was a bit strange. But Lin Xiao didn't wait long before she heard movement inside. Then Shin Yujin's door was opened, and Shin Yuding came out. He looked back at Shin Yujin reluctantly and said, "Then I'll go down first." Although he said he would go down, he suddenly reached out to Shin Yujin's face. Shin Yujin immediately shrank her head and didn't let him touch her. Shin Yuding sighed and turned to leave. Lin Xiao went into the room behind them and then waited for Shin Yujin to come in and close the door. Then she suddenly pulled her into the space. Shin Yujin was startled when she was suddenly pulled in, but when she saw the familiar environment, she immediately relaxed. They stood in front of the door of the small building. Lin Xiao stood in front of her and said, "In fact, it's okay for you to let him touch you, as long as you don't, kiss and have sex." Shin Yujin, who was so bluntly told by Lin Xiao, immediately felt embarrassed. She looked at her awkwardly. Lin Xiao walked into the building and then went to the sofa and sat down. She waved to her and asked her to sit on the sofa next to her. Shen Yuzhen walked in and saw that Xie Dong was already sitting on a single sofa. Lin Xiao said to Shen Yuzhen, "You see, Junjun takes care of her son every day, and he can touch him however he wants. You don't have to worry that you will infect Shen Yuzhen." Xie Dong heard Lin Xiao's words and looked at Shen Yuzhen curiously. Shen Yuzhen looked at Lin Xiao and opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Lin Xiao knew what she was worried about and said, "I said it's okay. Believe me." "Well, I suddenly pulled you two in because I have something to do. Tomorrow, you two are responsible for loosening the soil in that field. I'm going to plant the potatoes and pumpkins." Xie Dong and Shen Yuzhen nodded when they heard that there was a mission. They didn't mind going down to the fields to work. After all, they had nothing to do now. Only Lin Xiao would arrange work for them, because they only belonged to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao continued, "I've seen it. The area around this land can still be developed. In the future, most of our work will be concentrated here. We are probably the only zombies in the world that are farming." Xie Dong and Shen Yuzhen looked at each other. They wanted to develop the land near the mountains into plantations, and there were so many mutant zombies. Then, Lin Xiao left the space and quietly went to Wu Qingyue's room. She glanced at the two soldiers who couldn't see her, and then leaned against the door to listen for any movements inside. Then, she heard Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing talking inside. It seemed like they had just finished talking. Not long after she leaned against the door, she heard footsteps coming towards the door. She quickly retreated and leaned against the wall behind a soldier. Then, she heard the door open and Xiao Liqing came out. When he turned around to open the door, Lin Xiao quickly slipped inside. Just when he turned around to open the door, she went into Wu Qingyue's room. She glanced at Wu Qingyue, who was still sitting on the sofa. He was leaning against the sofa with his arms crossed in front of his chest. On his handsome face, the corners of his mouth were slightly curled, and his eyes were shining. Lin Xiao glanced at his crossed legs. She always felt that a man with crossed legs was a bit girly. She didn't look at him and turned to walk into the bedroom. There was a bulging bag on one side of the bed, and the other side was empty. Lin Xiao walked to the bulging bag and then squatted down by the bed. She reached out to touch the bag and felt the emotions brought by the little person. Well, it seemed to be very happy. It seemed like it really liked the straw doll she gave. Moreover, the faint ruthlessness in her heart had already disappeared. When Lin Xiao's hand touched the quilt, Wu Yueling seemed to be stunned for a moment. She suspiciously lifted a corner of the quilt, thinking that her father was standing by her bed and touching her. But there was no one by the bed. Huh? Wu Yueling curiously looked left and right, up and down. No one. She sat up with her messy hair and looked in the direction of the sofa outside. She saw her father sitting on the sofa in a daze. Wu Yueling was immediately surprised. Huh? Her father was outside. Then who was touching her here? She was puzzled and couldn't understand. She began to look left and right, up and down, looking at the ceiling and even flipping over under the bed. No? Wu Yueling sat back with a face full of curiosity. At this time, Lin Xiao laughed and reached out to touch her head. Then she took out the straw doll from under the quilt. She stood the doll up at an angle that Wu Qingyue couldn't see. Wu Yueling was stunned by her touch. Then she opened her eyes wide and looked at the straw doll standing up by herself in surprise. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something, and the surprise turned into surprise. Wow, it's a zombie mother! She hurriedly raised her hand to grab the invisible hand on her head. As a result, Lin Xiao sensed the name in her heart and felt bad. Wait a minute. What the hell is a zombie mother? However, her voice was transmitted from the hand to Wu Yueling's heart. As soon as Wu Yueling heard the voice, she was sure that it was her. She laughed and happily shouted in her heart, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." Lin Xiao couldn't stand it anymore and quickly reached out to gently cover her little mouth. She said in her heart, "Be good. Don't shout like that. I'm not your stepmother." As a result, Wu Yueling, who was originally happy and cheerful, suddenly became depressed. She was stunned for a moment and suddenly pouted. Her eyes turned red and she felt like she was about to cry. Wu Yueling cried and shouted in her heart, I want mommy. I want zombie mother. I want zombie mother. Ling Ling doesn't want anyone else. Ling Ling only wants you. This time, Lin Xiao was stunned. She looked at her with some uncertainty and thought to herself, did this child hear what I said just now? Why is her reaction so big? Then immediately, Wu Yueling nodded at her. Yes, yes, yes. Ling Ling can hear it. Ling Ling wants you to be Ling Ling's mommy, mamas. Lin Xiao was a little confused. Was this child communicating with her in her heart now? This seemed normal. Wasn't her heart closed? Why didn't something like this happen before? Chapter 441. Looking at Wu Yueling's red nose. Lin Xiao quickly comforted her. Okay. Don't cry, don't cry. I panic when you cry, although I don't know what to panic about. Please don't cry. Wu Yueling blinked her tearful eyes and stared at her, but she couldn't see Lin Xiao's face, so she didn't know where to look, so she had to lower her head. She heard Lin Xiao's voice, and she knew it was the voice of a zombie mother. Although she didn't know what a zombie mother meant, she knew the meaning of the word mother. However, she knew the meaning of the word mother. Other people's children had a mother by their side, but she didn't. Her father told her that she was not his biological child. Her father and mother were dead, and she could only see the photos her father gave her. But that was just a photo, even if her father said that the people in the photos were her parents. But she didn't have a deep understanding of this, so she didn't know what it meant. Anyway, she only knew that her father was good to her, and that was enough. So Little Man told her that the zombie sister she liked could be with her papa and could be her mother. Then she heard her father say that he wanted her to be Ling Ling's stepmother. So Wu Yueling had already determined this fact in her heart. But when she heard Lin Xiao didn't admit it, she panicked. So she was about to cry immediately. Lin Xiao panicked when she saw that she was about to cry. She was most afraid of children crying. What could she do? She had no choice but to explain to her, not everyone can be a mother. Your father has to agree. And your father must like her, and she must like your father too, so she can be your mother. Wu Yueling lowered her head, pouting her mouth and crying silently. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, she immediately replied, Dad has agreed. It's Dad who said. Dad agreed. This time Lin Xiao was stunned again. She withdrew her hand and thought in surprise. What? He agreed? What's going on? Is he lying to this child? Wu Yueling felt her hand loosen and looked around in a panic. Lin Xiao took her little hand and asked in her heart, Did your father really say that? Did he agree? Wu Yueling calmed down when she held her hand. She nodded. Yes, Dad agreed. He even said that he wanted to marry you. Lin Xiao. Wait a minute. Wait? What? Lin Xiao asked Wu Yueling in confusion. Is that what he told you? Wu Yueling nodded, completely unaware that she had already betrayed her father. She grabbed Lin Xiao's hand and pulled her forcefully. Ling Ling doesn't care. Ling Ling wants you to be Ling Ling's mother. Ling Ling wants to be Little Man's sister. No, Ling Ling is already Little Man's sister. Has Little Man become a little baby? When can Little Man come out to play? Lin Xiao was a little overwhelmed by her childish way of thinking. She quickly said, Okay, Ling Ling, be good. I'm leaving. You sleep first. Don't tell your dad I was here, okay? I'll come back to see you tomorrow night. Remember to open the glass door in the back quietly. When Wu Yueling heard that she was leaving, she was stunned. At first, he didn't want to let her go, but she said that she would come back at night. Only then did he agree in his heart. He nodded in response to Lin Xiao's request. At this moment, Wu Qingyue, who was outside, suddenly stood up. He turned around and walked into the bedroom, only to see that Wu Yueling had already sat up without him knowing. Ling Ling, you haven't slept yet? Wu Qingyue said as he walked over. Wu Yueling turned to look at him and shook her head. Wu Qingyue saw her red eyes and nose. He sat by her bed and asked in surprise, Why is Ling Ling crying? Why are you crying? Wu Yueling only shook her head at him. Then she looked in another direction. Lin Xiao retreated carefully, afraid that Wu Qingyue would find out. Wu Qingyue looked in Wu Yueling's direction curiously, but there was nothing there. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Then why are you crying?" Wu Yueling looked up at him with a wronged expression. Wu Qingyue looked at her big teary eyes strangely. He was very confused. He asked, "Lingling, can you tell Dad why you are crying?" Wu Yueling looked at him for a while, then suddenly turned around and hid under the blanket with her back to him, ignoring him. Wu Qingyue was left alone with a puzzled look on his face. He pulled the blanket and asked, "What's going on? If you don't tell me, how will I know? If I don't know, how can I help you solve your problem?" Hearing this, Wu Yueling immediately got out of the blanket again. Then she pulled his hand and swayed from side to side. She looked at him expectantly. This time, Wu Qingyue understood and said, "Oh, you miss her that much? But you don't have to cry even if you can't see her." Although he said that, a light flashed in his eyes, because he realized that his daughter's mood seemed to have improved instantly. Even though she looked like she was about to cry, Wu Qingyue could still see something else in her eyes. Wu Yueling's eyes lit up with hope again, and her previous gloomy mood and negative aura were all gone. She was still in a very negative mood when she came up after dinner tonight. Wu Qingyue looked around suspiciously, but there was still nothing. He looked down at Wu Yueling and asked, "Has someone been here?" Wu Yueling shook her head directly. Wu Qingyue thought for a moment and said, "Then do you really want to see her? And ask her to go back with us?" Wu Yueling nodded repeatedly. Wu Qingyue said, "How about this, Lingling? Ask her to go back with us, okay? At most, I can bring you to see her, but I may not be able to bring her home. But Lingling you can. She likes Lingling, right?" Wu Yueling's eyes flashed, and she immediately nodded. Lin Xiao, who was standing by the window and was about to jump out, rolled her eyes. "Hey, what are you teaching a child to do? Let a child kidnap her? In your dreams." Wu Qingyue touched Wu Yueling's head and said, "Okay, Lingling, lie down and sleep. Sleep early and you'll grow up." Wu Yueling lay down obediently and looked at Wu Qingyue with the blanket in her arms. Then she closed her eyes. Wu Qingyue stood up and walked to the outer hall. Suddenly, he began to take off his clothes. He took off his camouflage military jacket and threw it on the sofa. Then, he continued to take off his t-shirt. Revealing his well-defined muscles, he walked to the bathroom in long pants. Lin Xiao, who had her eyes stuffed with ice cream, silently pulled her gaze away from his muscular back. Then, she flipped over and jumped out of the window. She was almost tempted by his beauty. This man was indeed dangerous. Chapter 442. Wu Qingyue walked into the bathroom with a smile on his face. If he didn't guess wrong, the female zombie had already sneaked into his room. How could he not know his daughter? He already knew it from her abnormal behavior. Now it seemed that the female zombie had already come out of seclusion. She was just hiding from him and didn't want to show up. She was very concerned about Lingling. Why didn't she care about him? Did she think that if she didn't show up, she wouldn't have to be responsible for him? He wanted to see how long she was going to hide. Lin Xiao, who didn't know that Wu Qingyue was going to stay here, went to Lu Jun's room on the 5th floor. She stood at the door and knocked, then waited for the reaction inside. After a while, the door opened. Lu Jun was slightly stunned when she saw that there was no one outside, but she quickly reacted. "Captain?" She now addressed Lin Xiao as Captain. Otherwise, it would make Miss Lu feel weird, because she knew that Lin Xiao wasn't Lu Tianyu, but she couldn't call her Lin Xiao directly. It would only make others suspicious. Lin Xiao pushed her into the room and walked over to see Tong Tong sleeping on the bed. Lu Jun probably knew that Lin Xiao would notice Tong Tong, so she said, "It's okay. Let him sleep here." Lin Xiao nodded and brought her into the space. Then she asked her to wait in the living room of the building, and then she went out again. This time, she went to the roof. Qiu Lily and Ming Ming sat on the roof, and Lin Xiao quietly walked over. Then when the two of them weren't paying attention, she directly brought them into the space. The two of them were suddenly pulled, and when they reacted, they found that they were already in Lin Xiao's space. "Oh!" Ming Ming looked around in a daze and didn't react for a moment. "You're out?" Qiu Lily quickly reacted and asked Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao nodded and walked into the small building with the two of them. Come in. I have something to discuss with you. Since she couldn't go out to face that man for the time being, she had to avoid him first. It was about time for her to lie down in the south. Qiu Lily followed her into the living room of the small building and sat down on the sofa. After Lin Xiao sat down, he said to the four of them, I'm going to the south in 2 days, so I want to discuss with you about your work when I'm not here. Lily, do you want to go with me or stay here? She first asked for Qiu Lily's opinion because she was the strongest here. Regardless of whether it was to follow him to the south, she would be a great helper in combat. If he stayed, he would be a very good expert to hold down the fort. However, all of this depended on her own will. Qiu Lily immediately raised her hand. I want to go. Lin Xiao nodded and said, That's good. There was no one guarding this place. I'm worried about Yuan Tianxing's strength. If a rank 7 Arcanist comes, I'll be able to kill him. Just like the robber from a few days ago. Even if Yuan Tianxing, Lin Feng, and Chen Yuding attacked together, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. Qiu Lily was stunned and thought for a moment. He felt that what Lin Xiao said was right. This place could not be left without an expert. She asked blankly, What should I do? But I want to go with you. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, If you want to go with me, then you'll have to raise the strength of the others. As for the people here, I can only help Ming Ming raise her strength to the late stage of the King realm at most, and she needs a lot of zombie cores. She looked at Ming Ming, who was listening to them in a daze. Hearing that Lin Xiao wanted to help her level up, Ming Ming immediately became spirited. She quickly took out a small bag from her pocket. She opened it and showed it to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao looked at it and saw that it was a small cloth bag for holding jewelry. She didn't know where she found it. The bag was full of zombie cores, shining brightly. There were at least 3 level 5 zombie cores and a large number of level 4 and 3 zombie cores. Ow! Is it enough? Ming Ming asked Lin Xiao with some anticipation. Lin Xiao looked at it and shook her head slightly. It's not enough. Then Qiu Lily took out a few level 5 zombie cores from her small bag. What about these? She asked. Lin Xiao nodded and said, These should be enough. But can you stay here and look after the house? Ming Ming didn't answer her and turned to look at Qiu Lily. Qiu Lily looked at her strangely and said, Well, why are you looking at me? Shouldn't you answer Qiao Qiao? Lin Xiao smiled and said, She's asking for your opinion. Qiu Lily rolled her eyes and said, Of course I want you to stay, because you're also very powerful. At least, if a level 7 psychic comes, the 3 of them together won't be able to beat him. Although we probably won't be able to win, we won't let the other party gain too much of an advantage. Lin Xiao nodded and said, That's right. Ming Ming looked at them reluctantly, but she didn't protest. She had obviously accepted it. She still had to level up anyway. She would just treat it as an exchange. Lin Xiao saw through her thoughts and said, If I level you up, you should at least help me with something. Otherwise, I won't level you up. Ow, ow. I got it. Ming Ming roared at Lin Xiao with dissatisfaction and then bared her teeth at her. Lin Xiao nodded and said, That's right. Then she turned to Lu Jun and said, Jun, wait for me to leave and then tell Yuan Tianxing and the others about my actions. Then you'll be responsible for translating for them and this guy. Pay attention to this guy. Lu Jun pointed at herself with some surprise and said, Me? She looked at Ming Ming. With this guy's personality, she couldn't handle him. Lin Xiao shook her head and said with a smile, It's okay. Just say that it's my idea. Lu Jun nodded in surprise and said, Oh, then I'll try my best. Ming Ming's level was much higher than hers, but her IQ was a bit low. There was still a way to make her listen. Lin Xiao continued to say to Xie Dong and Lu Jun, You two will be responsible for taking a few zombies to grow potatoes and pumpkins. I'll let Ming Ming help you keep an eye on these zombies. If they do anything against you, ask Ming Ming to take care of them. As long as they don't hurt the humans in this city, you don't have to kill them. But if anyone dares to hurt people, just kill them. Don't wait for me to come back. Understand? She looked at Xie Dong and Lu Jun, then at Ming Ming. Fang Dong and Xin Yuzhen both nodded. Ming Ming just looked at her. Ming Ming just looked at her and didn't react. Xie Dong and Lu Jun didn't have any objections and nodded. Lin Xiao waved her hand, and suddenly a few books appeared on the table. She said, "These are the planning books I collected before. You could take a look. I'll leave a few earth and water zombies for you. I'll take the rest." Chapter 443. Lin Xiao said she was going south, but only Qiu Lily and Lu Jun knew what she was going to do. Xie Dong and the other two didn't know, but they wouldn't ask. Then, she sent the pumpkin seeds and sprouted potatoes out of the sweet potato field. She also gave Xie Dong a quest. Build a small wooden house here and use it as a duty room. Xie Dong had no problem with building a wooden house. He was also very interested. After Lin Xiao gave out the task, she brought Ming Ming and the zombie core to the lake. Other than Xie Dong, who stayed in the house, the others also followed curiously to the lake. They were all very curious as to why the scary aura in the lake had disappeared. Only Qiu Lily knew that Man Man had gone somewhere else. Lin Xiao placed a large bucket of water on the shore and said to Ming Ming, "Come here, take a bath first before going down." After bathing the zombie leaders, she didn't give Ming Ming a bath. She wanted to help her level up, so she had her wash her body before going into the water. She waved a black mist around her and Ming Ming, then had Ming Ming take off her clothes. Ming Ming still knew how to put on and take off clothes, and she always kept her clothes clean. Seeing Ming Ming take off her clothes without any embarrassment, Lin Xiao had her stand in the bucket. Then she used a ladle to pour water over her head. After pouring water over her a few times, she had Ming Ming use her hands to rub off the mud. After washing Ming Ming clean, Lin Xiao took off her own clothes and prepared to walk out of the lake with Ming Ming. Suddenly, she stepped on the ground and touched her eyes. Sure enough, the contact lenses in her eyes had disappeared at some point, so she didn't notice that she was looking at others with her naked eyes. Lin Xiao thought about it and remembered that she forgot to take out the level 7 energy when she was absorbing it. It must have been melted by the energy. She sighed and threw it to the back of her mind. She pulled Ming Ming into the water and said, "Relax later. Don't worry, you won't choke on the water." It was Ming Ming's first time in the water, so she was very curious and stepped around in the water. Moreover, he was very curious about the energy in the water, and he liked the feeling of being enveloped by this energy. Lin Xiao pulled her to the depths of the water and pulled her into the water. He then dragged her down to the bottom of the lake, with Ming Ming holding a handful of zombie cores in each hand. Different colored corpse cores glowed faintly at the bottom of the lake. It looked beautiful and dreamy. Lin Xiao took all the corpse cores from Dream and said to her in his heart, "Give me the corpse cores, I'll help you filter them." Standing on the ground at the bottom of the lake, Lin Xiao placed a hand on Ming Ming's back. Lin Xiao released all of the corpse cores and used the energy in the lake to control all of them around her. She held a level 3 pill in her hand and began to absorb it into her heart. Then, she controlled the energy of the surrounding lake water to enter her body through her pores and rush into her heart. The energy of the lake wrapped around the left side of her chest where her heart was, and then separated the impurities from the zombie core energy. Then, the pure energy was channeled through Lin Xiao's other hand and injected into Ming Ming's body. A wave of black energy surged out of Lin Xiao's mind and directly absorbed the impurities. Just like that, the level 3 corpse cores were quickly drained of energy. Lin Xiao reached out and took another level 3 corpse core from the side, then continued to filter it into Ming Ming's body. Lin Xiao used up all the level 3 corpse cores one by one, and then used the level 4 ones. Ming Ming only felt that wave of different pure energy was pouring into her body. It circled around her heart, then spread to her entire body, and then gathered in her head. As more and more energy was injected, Ming Ming's body started to heat up, and her head started to hurt. However, she knew what was going on. Every time she wanted to level up, she would have this headache. So she endured it. When Lin Xiao finished using the level 4 corpse cores and began to inject about the energy of a level 5 corpse core, Ming Ming already had a splitting headache. However, Ming Ming had 3 level 5 corpse cores, and Qiu Lily had also given her 3, so there were 6 in total. Therefore, Ming Ming endured the increasing headache brought by the energy of the 6 level 5 corpse cores. Lin Xiao said to her in his heart, I'm going to increase the energy input. You have to hold on, I'll help you break through. So you have to hold on, understand? Hearing Lin Xiao say that she could break through, Ming Ming's heart shook. She nodded. Lin Xiao suddenly increased the energy, and the energy that was originally like a small stream was suddenly flushed in from behind. She knew that the energy that Ming Ming had filtered and purified had been absorbed by the lake water. Therefore, the energy of the corpse cores had been increased by the energy of the lake water. This allowed Ming Ming's level to quickly rise to the peak of level 6. Therefore, as long as she increased the impact of the energy, she might be able to rush to level 7. It was not that Lin Xiao did not consider whether Ming Ming would still listen to their control after breaking through to level 7. However, judging from Ming Ming's personality, she would at least not do anything bad. Therefore, at this point, Lin Xiao thought about it and decided to let it go. Helping her break through directly would be considered as doing her a favor. In the future, she would at least have to thank him for this matter. It was fine if she did not know how to be grateful. However, if she wanted to harm others, Lin Xiao felt that she would still think of a way to deal with her. Even though she was mentally prepared, the impact of the energy almost broke Ming Ming's endurance. Ming Ming quickly gritted her teeth to stay awake. Qiu Lily, who was by the lake, sensed the emotions at the bottom of the lake and frowned slightly. Because the energy in the lake had blocked her senses, she could not sense anything. She did not know what the situation was like down there. It had already been more than 10 hours. Meanwhile, Wu Yueling, who was outside, waited for the sky to turn dark in anticipation. She ran to the floor-to-ceiling glass door in front of the balcony and looked up at the sky anxiously. In her heart, she hoped that the sky would turn dark soon. Then, Wu Chunyue smiled and saw that she had been staring at the sky all day. At first, he did not know what she was looking at. Then, looking at her expectant expression, he thought about it. What she was most looking forward to now was meeting that female zombie. If meeting that female zombie had something to do with the sky, was his Lingling waiting for the sky to turn dark? Could it be that the female zombie was coming when the sky turned dark? Thinking of this, the smile on Wu Qinyue's face deepened. A meaningful look flashed across his long and narrow, smiling eyes. Chapter 444. When Lin Xiao finally broke through Meng Ming's level, she was exhausted. When she woke up, she realized that she and Ming Ming had floated up from the bottom of the lake and were floating in the middle of the lake. She looked at Ming Ming and was surprised to find that the scales on her face were gone. A perfect little face appeared in front of Lin Xiao. Although it wasn't as pretty and exquisite as Qiu Lily, it was still a pretty young girl's face. Ming Ming also opened her eyes. A pair of green eyes shone with a dazzling light. But very quickly, her gaze began to flicker with a complicated expression. Confusion, doubt, shock, anger, pain, sorrow, hatred, confusion, innocence, and so on. All of these emotions crisscrossed in her eyes and mind. Soon, Ming Ming's face revealed an intense expression of pain. Her pretty face contorted as she covered her temples with both hands. Her body unconsciously shrank. Roar! Ming Ming opened her mouth and roared. The sound traveled from the water to Lin Xiao's ears, giving her a slight fright. Ming Ming's voice became a sound wave that spread out from the water, although a lot of it was dissolved by the energy of the lake. But it still traveled very far. Lin Xiao looked at her silently. She could feel the heart-wrenching pain in Ming Ming's voice. Lin Xiao knew that Ming Ming had regained her memory. But looking at her current state, she might as well continue to forget. Ming Ming curled up her body as a wave of sadness spread out. Lin Xiao looked at her and knew that there was a story behind it. She didn't disturb her and swam up by herself. She would let her stay down there and calm down. Seeing Lin Xiao coming ashore with a black mist, she waited for her to put on her clothes. Qiu Lily and the others surrounded her curiously. Hey, where's Ming Ming? Qiu Lily looked back at the lake and asked Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao took the towel from Lu Jun and wiped her long hair as she said, Oh, she seems to have regained her memory, but it's obvious that the memory gave her a huge blow. I think she's in a bad mood. Let her stay down there for a while. I think she'll come up by herself later. Qiu Lily and the others widened their eyes in surprise as they looked at Lin Xiao. Ah, is Ming Ming awake? In that case, will she become more normal? Qiu Lily said. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, I don't know. She would have to wait until she came up herself to find out. All right, how long have we been down there? She suddenly remembered that she had an appointment with Xiao Budian. Qiu Lily looked at the exquisite watch on her slender wrist and said, You've been down there for 18 hours. It's 3:00 the next afternoon. Lin Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. He thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had caught up in time. At this time, Little Man-Man's voice suddenly sounded in her mind. Mama, Little Man-Man felt Ling Ling's aura. Is she near Mama? Lin Xiao looked at his stomach in surprise. Then, he looked up at the lake and thought to himself, you can feel this too? She and her father are staying in our base right now. Little Man-Man immediately said cheerfully, Mama, take Little Man-Man to see Tiny Tot. Just let Tiny Tot touch Mama's belly. Lin Xiao said, let's wait for tonight. I'll go find her at night. Little Man-Man asked strangely, Oh, but why do we have to wait until night? Isn't it better to go now? Lin Xiao thought for a moment. She couldn't tell her that she didn't want to see Wu Qingyue. Could she? She said, because I have an appointment with Tiny Tot. We'll go when the time is right. Little Man-Man said, Oh, then let's wait for tonight. Then Little Man-Man will go to sleep for a while. Mama will call Little Man-Man at night. Lin Xiao asked doubtfully, What should I call you? Little Man-Man said, Touch Mama's belly and then call me Little Man-Man. Lin Xiao nodded in her heart, Oh, okay then. At this time, there was movement on the surface of the lake. Ming Ming swam up from the lake. Her whole body was covered with thick metal scales, and there were a few bone-like thorns growing out of her elbows and knees. Ming Ming covered her chest with her hands and walked out of the water. She stood in front of Lin Xiao, and water was dripping from her body. She looked at Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily. Suddenly, she opened her arms and threw herself at Lin Xiao. He held her in his arms and started to cry. Wah! Lin Xiao looked at Qiu Lily with a dumbfounded expression. What the hell was going on? Qiu Lily also looked at Ming Ming, who suddenly hugged Lin Xiao with a blank expression, and then looked at the other two in confusion. Lu Jun looked at Qiu Lily and said, I thought she was going to hug you. Qiu Lily said, How did she learn from me? She had the same reaction as the first time I met Xiao Qiao. Shen Yuzhen looked on in confusion. Lin Xiao raised her hands and made a gesture of surrender. She said helplessly, What's going on? Ming Ming, did you hug the wrong person? You should be hugging Lily. After all, this child was usually so clingy to Qiu Lily, and Qiu Lily clung to her. Ming Ming cried for a while before letting go of her and wiping her tears. But when she wiped them, there was nothing. She could only put down her hands awkwardly and said, My name is Elmarch. Ming Ming's voice was very clear, not as soft and sweet as Qiu Lily's. Ming Ming's voice had a neutral feeling, and it couldn't be distinguished between a man and a woman. But it wasn't unpleasant. Instead, it was a little special. Lin Xiao looked at her in surprise. You can speak too. Elmar nodded and turned her head to look. She picked up her clothes and put them on before walking to Qiu Lily's side. She smiled at her and said, Thank you for not chasing me away before. Qiu Lily was a little overwhelmed by her polite look and tone. She quickly waved her hand and said, Oh no, you're welcome. Well, because Xiao said that you're not a bad person and said that you can stay with us. Elmar smiled gently. Although her whole body was covered with shining scales, her smile was more attractive than the scales on her body. There was a heroic spirit in her smile. She was very handsome, but she didn't lose the gentleness that a girl should have. Anyway, among the 4 people present, except for Shen Yuzhen, who was not familiar with Elmar, the other 3 felt that the current Ming Ming was completely different from the previous Ming Ming. Coupled with her ear-length short hair, she was a handsome girl. The appraisal was completed. Lin Xiao said, Since you remember what happened in the past, you should still remember what you promised us before you leveled up. Elmar looked at Lin Xiao with a faint smile and nodded. She said, I remembered, don't worry. I'll take good care of this new base and wait for you to come back. Lin Xiao breathed a sigh of relief, then turned around and walked toward the small building. Let's talk inside first. Chapter 445. Wait a minute. Lu Jun suddenly shouted at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao stopped and looked back at her. What's wrong? Lu Jun said, It's been more than 10 hours. Let me go out and see Tong Tong. Tong Tong must be scared. Lin Xiao patted her head and said, Oh, I almost forgot about it. Okay, I'll send you out first. Then she quickly sent Lu Jun out of the space and then flashed back in. Then she continued to walk to the small building. After arriving at the living room of the small building, Xiedong was stunned to see Elmar come in. But he didn't say anything and just looked at her. After Elmar put on her clothes, the scales on her body disappeared. But the tail was still there. Lin Xiao and the others had long been used to her image with a tail. But after Elmar recovered her memory, she seemed to be particularly concerned about her tail. She looked back every 3 steps and swung her tail every 2 steps. After finding a seat in the living room, Lin Xiao looked at Elmar and said, Say what you want to say. If you don't want to keep it in your heart, we can all listen. It's okay if you don't want to say it, but I think it's better for you to say it. Although it's another scar, the thick blood inside still needs to be squeezed out. Qiu Lily nodded and looked at her curiously. Elmar looked at the others and thought for a while. Then she smiled sadly, but it was a smile that was uglier than crying. She said, My name is Elmarch. Actually, I'm from the Northeast. But when the apocalypse happened, I was in Beijing. When the apocalypse came, I was still a normal human being. Because I learned martial arts, I spent a lot of energy rushing home to find my family. I was very happy when I found that they were not dead. But after I protected them and sent them to the base, they pushed me into the zombies. Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily looked at her silently. After going through so many hardships to protect her family, she was finally betrayed by her family when she arrived at a safe place. It was really hopeless. Elmar's eyes were slightly unfocused as she said, And it was them who pushed me out. They had always disliked me for wasting their food. Lin Xiao and the others were speechless. Qiu Lily slightly opened her eyes and said, What? Is that why they pushed you out? Your family doesn't treat you like family at all, right? Lin Xiao sighed and said, After his age, human nature has changed. A lot of the darkness in people's hearts has been forced out. That's why the zombies aren't scary after the apocalypse, but humans are. Elmar and Qiu Lily nodded in agreement. On the other hand, Xiedong and Shen Yuzhen were deep in thought. At this time, Lin Xiao said, But I also have humans here. Although we manage both sides separately, we can't avoid contact. If you don't want to stay here, you can leave when I come back. At this time, Elmar came to her senses. She looked up at Lin Xiao and said blankly, Leave? No, I don't want to leave. I want to be with you, even if there are humans here. It's fine as long as I don't get close to them. Can I? She thought that Lin Xiao wanted to drive her away, and her eyes became a little flustered. It was just that her expression wasn't that obvious. Lin Xiao looked at her and was silent for 2 seconds before saying, I'm not driving you away. I just want you to think clearly before making a choice. Maybe if you stay here now, you might regret it in the future. Elmar shook her head. She sat up straight like a serious student. She said, No, I won't go. I won't regret it. I never regret what I've done. Even if I had escorted them to the base, even if I knew this would happen again, I would still choose to escort them. Lin Xiao looked at her determined look and nodded. Okay, since you've said so, I have nothing to object to. What about you? The others shook their heads. Lin Xiao looked at her and asked, So when you were pushed out by them, you were directly bitten by zombies? Elmar nodded. I was injured. When I was about to reach the base, I was injured. When I was about to reach the base, I was suddenly pushed out of the truck by them. At that time, my consciousness was already a bit blurry, so when I reacted, I only saw the truck driving away and the surrounding zombie horde. Lin Xiao sighed and said, So your family should now be in the base in the northeast. Because you ran to the south. Deep in your heart, you should have rejected that direction. Elmar nodded. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "You're awake. You're not the same person as before. You were like a naughty child before. You even bit my head. Do you remember?" "Ah, that. I remember." "Ah, ha ha." Elmar didn't feel good when she was reminded of this. She looked at Lin Xiao awkwardly and said with embarrassment. Qiu Lily looked at her in surprise. "Huh? When did you bite her head?" "Ahem. This. Let's not talk about that. Dark history." Elmar's expression was very awkward and speechless. She was a bit stupid before, and the things she did didn't make sense. Lin Xiao said, "You didn't just lose your memory before. Maybe even your mind was damaged. Jun and I both lost our memories, but we haven't seen such an example." Qiu Lily stared at Elmar and said, "Since Xiao said so, your IQ was indeed very low before." Elmar's face darkened, and she said, "You can't blame me. I didn't cause it. Who would have thought that not only would he lose his comprehension ability, he would also become like this?" Lin Xiao said with a smile, "It's good that you can stay like this. You're also very lucky to meet us. Otherwise, you might have been killed by someone stronger than you, and their corpse core would have been taken away before you recovered your memory." Elmar thought about it and replied, "Yes, it's good to meet you." Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "You like children." Elmar nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, I have no resistance to cute children. I've always been the king of children." She didn't realize that Lin Xiao had successfully diverted her attention. He didn't let her continue to float in the painful memory of being pushed into the fire pit by her family. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "I can see that the first time I met you was because you kidnapped Tiny Tot. You scared me, and I thought you were going to do something bad to her." Qiu Lily said, "At that time, you followed Xiao to our territory. If she hadn't warned me in advance, I would have beaten you away." Elmar already wanted to find a hole to crawl into for what she had done in her previous brainless state. However, Lin Xiao said, "By the way, why were you so close to Lily before? I thought you would hug Lily just now." Elmar silently glanced at Qiu Lily and said to Lin Xiao, "She's a neat freak, so she definitely won't let me hug her. If I really hug her, I will only hug empty air. That will ruin the atmosphere." Lin Xiao and the others were speechless. Chapter 446. After discussing with them, Lin Xiao went outside and pointed at the potatoes and said, "Those can be planted directly. The ones over there can be stored or eaten by Lin Feng. The pumpkin seeds are in the little box on the cupboard over there, soaking in the lake water." Qiu Lily and the others asked her curiously, "Hey, you soaked the pumpkin seeds in the lake. Won't they rot?" Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "No, they absorb the energy of the lake. So I think if we plant them outside, the chance of mutation will be very, very small. But let's see what the first batch will look like." The others nodded. Lin Xiao went to the strawberry field and called out 2 level 4 water zombies. Then he called out to an earth-type zombie that was scared out of its wits. She said to the 3 zombies, "You guys listen to the 2 of them in the future. When I'm not here, you guys should listen to them. You can only stay in this field and don't run around. If you run, you will be dead when I come back and catch you." Lin Xiao waved her hand and threw a black fog towards them. It was used to threaten these zombies. Elmar said, "Don't worry, I won't let them run, unless they want me to smash their heads." As soon as she spoke, the zombies immediately moved a few steps towards Lin Xiao and looked at Elmar with fear. Lin Xiao turned to look at Elmar and said, "It seems that they don't dare. You scared them away." Elmar shrugged and said with a smile, "It has nothing to do with me. Who told me to be a higher level?" In the afternoon, Lin Xiao released Elmar, Xiedong, Shun Yuzhen, and the 3 level 4 zombies. After she entered the space, she heard a few excited howls coming from the woods. Lin Xiao could tell that it was the sound of the zombie dogs. The howls came from one side and then from the other. It seemed that this guy went to play with the snake. But it was strange that the giant snake refused to go near the lake. She didn't know why. This guy had been in her space for several days. It didn't eat or drink and just stayed in the woods. From time to time, it would be harassed by the zombie dogs. She knew that snakes could go hungry for a long time after a meal, but this king cobra was so big. How much would he have to eat before he was full? Moreover, it was injured. Would it be tormented by the zombie dogs and die here? This time, Cho Lily didn't have any space to leave. She ran to the rooftop. He took out a blanket from somewhere and spread it on the edge of the roof. Then he lay on it with his chin propped up, legs crossed, and looked at the other zombies in Lin Xiao's space. After hearing the sounds from the forest, Cho Lily asked, "When you caught Tang He, you brought the snake here. Don't you want to eat it? Or do you want to raise them to store food?" Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "If it was a fierce snake, maybe I would do what you said. But I didn't think it was fierce, so I didn't plan to eat it. I wanted to send it out, but it wouldn't let me get close." Cho Lily asked curiously, "Then why do you let your dog torture it every day?" Lin Xiao shrugged and said, "I didn't let it go. Wang was bored here, so he went to play with the snake. I told him not to kill the snake, so he was just playing." Cho Lily looked at her speechlessly. "Look at you. You don't want to raise a living animal, but a dead dog. All right, now I have a living one, and it's another big snake. Do you want to ride it as a mount?" Lin Xiao laughed and said, "Mount? That's too small. It should at least be as thick as my whole body. It's only as thick as my waist." Cho Lily said, "Maybe you can raise it for a few years. Anyway, it's a mutant snake, so it will only grow bigger." Lin Xiao scratched her chin, thought for a moment, and nodded, "Hey, that's a good idea. Maybe in a few years, it will grow into a big fat snake, and we can lie on it." Cho Lily was stunned and looked at her blankly. "Ah, you really want to do that?" Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "Now that you mention it, I think it's okay. But I have to find a way to communicate with it first." After saying that, she immediately slipped into the woods excitedly. Cho Lily, who didn't know what to do, looked at her back with a stiff face. She murmured, "If the snake knew that it was my idea, would it hate me?" On the other side, Lin Xiao went into the depths of the woods. She piled up bags of rice and flour in the middle of the woods, as well as a lot of other supplies. Every time she came back, she would give some to Lin Wenwen. Because Lin Wenwen's space wasn't big, he couldn't put so much. Then she saw a 20-meter-long giant snake and a naked dead dog circling around her supplies. Lin Xiao flashed and stood on top of the bags of rice. She shouted at the zombie dog, "Don't play here, you two. If you break these bags, I will kill you too." After saying that, she waved her hand and threw out a black fog. The black mist morphed into a black dragon, baring its fangs and flying towards the two of them. Thus, the two animals that were running happily immediately ran in different directions. The zombie dog Wang also stopped chasing the snake and ran out of the woods, barking. Lin Xiao took back the black fog and looked at it, then chased in the direction that the giant snake left. Soon, she blocked in front of the black snake and looked at it. Seeing that it was her, the black snake immediately turned around and tried to escape in another direction. However, Lin Xiao flashed again and came to its side. Then the black snake gave up running. It curled up into a small hill and looked at Lin Xiao with its head on its hand. Lin Xiao stood in front of it and didn't say anything. "And then you stare at me, I stare at you." As they watched, King Glasses shrunk its head back. Finally, it was buried in the pile of bodies. Lin Xiao was speechless. She looked at the state of the black snake and found that its injuries were still very serious, although they didn't seem to be getting better. But it didn't get worse, which was already very good. At least it wouldn't die from its injuries. The giant snake also had energy, but its energy had been overdrawn by Tang He, so it hadn't recovered even 1% of its energy. Originally, it needed a good sleep and rest. However, after coming here, it was chased by the zombie dog every 2 or 3 days. It used up the little energy it had just recovered, so its injuries hadn't improved. It could only barely maintain its original state. Therefore, from Lin Xiao's current appearance, it looked very dispirited. Fatigue, hunger, and pain were all added together. It would be strange if it could recover. Chapter 447. Lin Xiao thought about it and felt that she should get it some food first. At that moment, she heard the sound of running. She could tell that it was four-legged. Perhaps it had heard the familiar running sound, but the giant snake that had just buried itself in its body stretched its head out vigilantly. It stared in the direction of the sound, its body twitching slightly. It was ready to run at any time. Lin Xiao saw a Wang run inboard. It seemed to have sensed the vigilance of the giant snake. When he was a few meters away from the giant snake, he immediately stopped. After thinking for a moment, he circled around the giant snake and then ran to Lin Xiao's feet. Seeing that Wang wasn't going to chase it, the giant snake didn't run away immediately, although it was still twitching. It wasn't that it didn't want to run, but it didn't have the strength. Lin Xiao kicked Wang and said, "Look at you. You're bullying it when it's injured and weak. You're taking advantage of it. You can't do that. Understand?" She said to it, but it didn't seem right. Then she said to it, "Well, it's not impossible, but you have to choose your target. It's not your enemy now, so you can't bully it when it's injured, understand?" Wang, who only knew how to take advantage of his opponent's weakness, looked at Lin Xiao blankly. "Why?" Lin Xiao said, "If you want to play with it, you have to consider its situation. Am I right? Think about it. If you were like it, with no energy, no stamina, and worked yourself to death, there would still be people chasing after you every day. Are you happy?" "Ow. I'm not happy. I'll bite it to death." After Wang understood what she meant, its face changed immediately. It bared its teeth and said fiercely. Lin Xiao spread out her hands and said, "Yes, you want to bite it to death. Then it wants to bite you to death too." She pointed at the giant snake as she spoke. "Ow?" Wang stared at the giant snake and fell into deep thought. Lin Xiao crossed her arms and said, "If you wanted to play with you, then help it recover first. Now I'll let you out. Go catch some big rats for it to eat. Maybe after eating and playing, it will have the strength to play with you." "Ow, ow." Wang's eyes immediately lit up as he looked at Lin Xiao happily. He obviously approved of her idea. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "So when I release you to the rat forest, try your best to catch more." She had already called the mountain next to the sweet potato field the rat forest, because the zombie dogs had been catching rats for many days, and they still hadn't finished catching them. "Ow." Wang looked at Lin Xiao expectantly, waiting for Lin Xiao to let her out. Lin Xiao grabbed its tail and threw it out of the space. Then, she stood on a rock by the side of the small forest and watched Xie Dong and the others start to loosen the soil. They took the hoes and shovels that Lin Xiao had found for them from the art garden and started to dig up the small piles of soil that the level for zombies had dug up and then pushed them back to fill them up. He dug again where he had not dug and then knocked the earth loose. These days, Wang was very good at catching mice. However, the mice here had all been chased away by him and had all run far away. That was why it had to run a little further to catch it and then run back. Not long after Lin Xiao was on the rock, she saw him coming out of the forest with a yellow rat in his mouth. This yellow rat was smaller than a normal mountain rat, and its fur was very hard. Squeak, 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 squeak. Wang was still holding the live rat, and it was still struggling vigorously in its mouth. Ever since Lin Xiao told him not to bite through the skin of the live prey, he seemed to like this method. He felt a sense of accomplishment, right? However, when he brought the yellow rat back, he looked left and right, but he didn't see Lin Xiao. He circled around his tail in confusion. Lin Xiao stood on top and looked at him, amused by his confused expression. She didn't jump off the rock until Wang had circled around a few times. Then, she gave him a light kick. Ow! Wang was startled by the sudden kick. He loosened his mouth and roared at his surroundings. However, when he saw that there was no one around him, he was confused again. But soon, he came to his senses, knowing that it was Lin Xiao. He knew Lin Xiao's invisibility skill. So, when he came to his senses, he didn't care about Lin Xiao's kick. He quickly chased after the yellow rat, which had tried to run away as soon as it loosened its mouth. The yellow rat, which hadn't run far, was immediately caught again. Squeak, 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 squeak. A Wang ran back to the rock with the yellow rat in his mouth. Then, he sat on the edge and looked up at the rock. It seemed to know that Lin Xiao was watching him from above. However, he didn't know that Lin Xiao was actually standing behind him. Lin Xiao pulled his tail and entered the space. After entering the space, A Wang immediately turned around and looked at Lin Xiao. His dark eyes lit up again. Lin Xiao crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at him. He pouted at the crossbow in the forest. Then he said, "Go. Bring it there yourself." A Wang immediately turned around and ran toward the forest happily. Lin Xiao followed behind him leisurely. A Wang followed the breath of the giant snake and ran over. Then, he found that the giant snake was still lying in its previous position. However, it buried its head in the ground, probably because it had sensed the arrival of the zombie dog. It moved its body and revealed a flat snake head. A long and narrow diamond-shaped eye looked at the zombie dog gloomily. However, when it saw the live rat in the snake's mouth, its eyes lit up. Although it was so small that it couldn't even fill the gap between its teeth, it was still meat. It was starving. A Wang held the yellow rat, which was only the size of a kitten, in its mouth. Then, it stood 3 meters away from the giant snake and looked up at it. Lin Xiao followed behind and stood on a tree branch. The giant snake was obviously attracted by the smell of the yellow rat, but it still looked at the zombie dog with a guarded expression. She knew that the giant snake had already given up on the zombie dogs. Although it had been chased and tossed around by the zombie dogs for the past few days, the zombie dogs did not cause any actual injuries on its body. It was just very annoying. So, the giant snake was tired and hungry. It didn't even want to move. Moreover, looking at the live food in A Wang's mouth, its hunger had overshadowed all other thoughts. It was just that it was still instinctively on guard. A Wang stood there and looked at it for a few seconds. Then, it lowered its head slightly and looked back at Lin Xiao on the tree. Then it turned around and took 2 small steps toward the giant snake. The giant snake didn't move. It just stared at it. It stretched its head a little higher and looked at the zombie dog suspiciously. Obviously, it didn't know what the zombie dog wanted to do. Chapter 448. 448. Seeing that the snake didn't react to it, Bow Wow made 2 more steps forward. The closer it got to the snake, the stronger the scent of its natural enemy was. The yellow rat in the snake's mouth struggled intensely. At that moment, Lin Xiao said to Bow Wow, "Don't get too close to it. Throw the food at it, then run away." Eh. Bow Wow turned and gave her a glance. It thought for a moment and figured out what she meant. It immediately tilted its body, held the rat in its mouth, tilted its head, and then threw the rat at the snake. After that, it quickly turned and ran toward Lin Xiao's tree. It squatted beside the tree and fixed its eyes on the snake. Looking at the live food that was suddenly thrown at it, the giant snake instinctively jumped out and opened its mouth to bite it. Creak! The yellow rat screamed in agony as the king cobra's venomous fangs pierced through its body. The snake confusedly glanced at the zombie dog which had run away, then held the food in its mouth. It quietly looked at Lin Xiao and Bow Wow for a few seconds, then shook its head and opened its mouth. After that, it directly swallowed the rat. It ate the rat. Lin Xiao said to Bow Wow, "Bow Wow, Bow Wow, go out and catch more rats. That's not even enough to fill the gap between its teeth." Oh. Bow Wow was very happy to see the snake eat the food it gave him. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, it immediately wagged its tail. Lin Xiao leaped off the tree and glanced at the rat which had already eaten the meat of a mosquito. After that, she dragged Bow Wow out of the space to catch more rats. This time, she followed the zombie dog into the mountain and started looking for rat holes all over the mountain. Xiaodong, Xin Yujin, and the other zombies didn't know what Lin Xiao and Bow Wow were doing, so they just kept doing what they were doing. When Bow Wow showed up the second time with a large rat in its mouth, the snake actually showed a little expectation in its eyes. Of course, it was still vigilant. However, it had more and more doubts. Every time it saw Bow Wow show up with a living rat in its mouth, it would be confused. However, in front of food, it soon stopped thinking so much. Anyway, it was fine as long as there was food. Lin Xiao and Bow Wow had been catching rats for the dog from 3 in the afternoon until 7 or 8 in the evening. They were still catching rats when it was already dark. The main thing was that this guy could eat too much. At first, the snake stayed alert, but when Bow Wow and Lin Xiao showed up, it realized that there was food. Gradually, it adapted to the situation and soon dropped its vigilance against Lin Xiao and Bow Wow. Lin Xiao and Bow Wow spent the whole afternoon catching over 30 different kinds of mice, squirrels, and birds for Bow Wow. Only then did he manage to feed the snake. Although the two of them didn't feel tired physically, they were mentally tired. This amount of food was going to make her poor. However, Lin Xiao had already decided to raise the zombie, and she wouldn't change her mind. In any case, once it recovered, it would be able to hunt for food on its own. All snakes were cold-blooded and did not know how to be grateful. Therefore, Lin Xiao wouldn't expect the snake to be grateful to her. She planned to find a way to trap it. With what? With the lake water, of course. She had observed that the snake really wanted to drink from the lake. However, for some reason, it didn't dare to approach the lake. After all, Viney was gone, and there were no living creatures in the lake. Except for energy, there was nothing else. Was it because of energy? Some things would be great if they were given a little bit, but wouldn't be good if they were given too much. Some of them might even be lethal. So, it depended on the situation. Lin Xiao thought for a moment, but didn't know if that was the reason. So, she found an ordinary bucket, which was about the size of a laundry bucket. After that, she filled the bucket with water and brought it to the snake. She didn't approach the snake, but put the bucket on a clearing not far away from it. The snake had regained its strength. In order to avoid Bow Wow, it directly climbed onto a tree and refused to come down. It had spent so much effort to feed the snake, but now that it was full, the snake climbed onto a tree and refused to play with it. Bow Wow, who didn't know how to climb up a tree, leaned against the tree trunk and barked at the snake. "All right, come here first," said Lin Xiao. "I don't want to play with you." "It doesn't want to play with you now. Wait until it wants to play with you. It will come down." Bow Wow unhappily glanced at the snake on the tree, then dropped its head and walked toward Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao brought Bow Wow out of the woods, then looked at the strawberry field and vegetable field which had been cleaned up. After that, she distributed the water to the zombies, leaving Bow Wow lying on the grass, feeling bored. The snake in the woods watched Lin Xiao and Bow Wow leave. After that, it turned its eyes to the bucket that Lin Xiao left behind. It spent a short while observing the woods. After confirming that Lin Xiao and her people wouldn't come back, the snake slowly came down from the tree. After that, it crawled toward the bucket. It raised its head to look at the water in the bucket, then put its head on the water surface and stuck out its tongue to test the water. After that, it suddenly dove into the water. Puff! 2 seconds after its head was in the water, it raised its head. A beam of light flashed across its eyes, and the tip of its tail rose. Outside, Lin Xiao seemed to have sensed something when the snake put its head into the bucket. When the snake dove into the bucket, she gave a confident smile. That trick worked as expected. It seemed that the energy in her lake water was very effective for human beings, zombies, and mutated beasts. After distributing the water to the zombies, Lin Xiao exited her space. Xie Dong and the others didn't stop working even though it was already dark. She didn't pay much attention to them. They were all zombies anyway, so the dark wouldn't affect them. She turned herself invisible and headed back toward the hotel, preparing to check on the little one. On the other side, Wu Yueling started to feel down again, as Lin Xiao didn't show up at all. As it got darker and darker, she pouted harder and harder. She started pounding her cheeks. Wu Qingyue poked her cheeks with a finger and said, "What's wrong? You were so happy earlier today. Why do you want to cry now?" Wu Yueling turned and gave him a glance, then dropped her eyelids and stayed silent. "Let's go and wash our hands and feet," said Wu Qingyue to her. "Then you can go to bed. She might come when you're asleep." Wu Yueling immediately raised her head to look at him. Clearly, she didn't realize that her movement had exposed something. Wu Qingyue was wearing a faint smile, but something had already flashed across his eyes. After that, he took Wu Yueling to wash her hands and feet. After the apocalypse, there was a shortage of water, even though there were water and ice power possessors. However, he still needed to teach his daughter how to save water. Therefore, he gave his daughter a bath every other day. If he didn't have a bath, he would wash her face, hands, and feet. Chapter 449. 449. After washing Wu Yueling's face and feet, Wu Qingyue carried her to the bed. Be a good girl and lie down. He put his daughter on the bed, then covered her with a blanket. After that, he rubbed the soft hair on her forehead. Wu Yueling closed her eyes expectantly. After that, Wu Qingyue turned and walked into the bathroom, quickly taking a shower. After that, he walked out of the bathroom in a pair of long pants and indoor slippers, his upper body bared. He sat down on the couch. On the table was a bottle of wine and a glass. In the post-apocalyptic era, wine was the favorite thing of all men. Many of them could be found because they could be stored for a long time. He picked up the bottle and opened the cap, then poured a third of the wine into the glass. That was a bottle of vodka. Wu Qingyue dropped the bottle and put the cap back on, then picked up the glass and leisurely leaned against the couch as he poured a mouthful of vodka into his mouth. The vodka was light and smooth, yet it gave him a strange, fire-like stimulation. It went from the tip of his tongue to his throat, and then to his stomach. He narrowed his pretty eyes, enjoying the fire-like passion. From time to time, he glanced at the only open French door on the balcony. When Lin Xiao came in, she saw that man drinking alone in the living room. She glanced at him with surprise, then prepared to walk into the living room. However, she stopped after making 2 steps. Her eyes dimmed slightly. Then she turned to look at the man on the couch. As she thought, he seemed to have sensed something. He put the glass on the table, then stood up. After that, he walked to the French door as if nothing had happened, then raised a hand to close it. The door was locked. Since you're here, let's make things clear before you leave. He smilingly turned to look at Wu Yueling, who was lying on the bed in the living room. Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. Hearing her father's words, Wu Yueling immediately realized something. She hurriedly got up from the bed, then sat on the bed and fixed her eyes on the glass door. Lin Xiao sighed, then showed up in the living room. She ignored Wu Qingyue but walked straight into the living room. Seeing Lin Xiao, Wu Yueling's eyes glowed as she happily watched her walk in. This time, Lin Xiao looked different from the one in Wu Yueling's memory. Her face was still the same, but her hair had grown longer. They were black and thin, hanging softly on her shoulders. Also, the whites of her eyes were eerily black. However, the 2 eyes in the middle were shining with a green light. Compared to the black eyes on the side, these 2 eyes were like green stars in the dark night sky. There was a strange sense of beauty. Wu Yueling looked into her eyes curiously. Lin Xiao walked to her bedside and sat down, then rubbed her head. He said, "Look, I kept my promise and came to see you. Be happy." Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao with her sparkling eyes and nodded. Lin Xiao dropped her hand and said, "All right, I'm here too. Can Lingling sleep now?" Wu Yueling just looked at her and didn't lie down. Lin Xiao had no choice but to hold her little hand and feel her heart. She said, "Don't leave tonight, okay?" Lin Xiao looked at her and smiled helplessly. Then, she said, "I'm going to a faraway place to do something soon. I don't know when I'll come back. Lingling, you need to follow your daddy back to your home. I'll go to your home to see you when I'm done with my business. Okay?" Hearing that, Wu Yueling was a little unhappy. However, she didn't stop Lin Xiao from leaving. Her daddy had told her that going to do something was like going to work. Adults needed to work to earn food. Without work, they would have no food. Without food, they would starve to death. She nodded when she heard that Lin Xiao would go to her home to play with her after finishing her business. Lin Xiao abruptly put her mouth near her ear and whispered to her, "Do you want to talk to Viney?" Hearing that, Wu Yueling's eyes glowed. That little bit of unhappiness just now immediately disappeared. She quickly nodded at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao gently put Wu Yueling's little hand on her lower abdomen and let her touch it. Then Viney's voice was heard. "La la la, little one, did you miss Viney?" Wu Yueling nodded. Viney said, "But Viney needs to sleep often to grow up. So, I can't come out often to talk to you. Little one, you need to be happy." Lin Xiao quietly listened to the two little ones without saying anything. A while later, Viney said that she was tired and wanted to sleep. She told Wu Yueling to go to bed early. Lin Xiao comforted her and said, "All right, go to sleep. If you don't sleep well, you won't grow tall." Wu Yueling didn't know why she needed to grow taller, but she was aware that not growing tall was a bad thing. So, she immediately laid down obediently. This time, she was finally going to sleep for Real. After saying that, Wu Qingyue sat back on the couch. When Lin Xiao came out, she found a glass on the tea table before him. A third of the wine was poured into the glass. "Please sit down." Wu Qingyue smilingly glanced at her, then pointed at the couch beside him. After that, he pushed the glass of wine to her. Lin Xiao sat down, then curiously picked up the glass. She put it under her nose and sniffed at it, then said, "Have you ever seen a zombie drinking wine?" Wu Qingyue smilingly raised his eyebrows as he looked at her and said, "Didn't I see it now?" Lin Xiao glanced at him blandly and said, "I haven't drunk it yet." Wu Qingyue said, "You're moving like a person who often drinks. Why don't you try a sip? Does alcohol work on zombies?" His words sounded casual, but he was trying to provoke Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "No one has tried that yet. Why don't we talk about what you want to talk about first?" She knew that since Wu Qingyue had been waiting for her tonight, she wouldn't be able to leave without talking to him. Wu Qingyue lazily leaned against the back of the couch as he gripped the rim of the glass and gently shook it. He stared at Lin Xiao's green eyes and said, "Shouldn't you be the one to talk first? I feel that I should be the victim. You should apologize to me." Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. He wanted her to apologize right away. Damn! How was she supposed to talk to him? She wasn't the one who got him in here. What did that have to do with her? Why did he want her to compensate him? She said calmly, "Wait a second. I'm a victim too. I don't think either of us will have to compensate the other. Will we?" Wu Qingyue gave her a meaningful smile and said, "What if I say that? I don't want you to compensate me for this one time. Don't want you to compensate me for this one time?" Lin Xiao looked at him with confusion. She had only done it with him once. Did he want her to do it again? Wait a second time. Lin Xiao suddenly narrowed her eyes and blinked. After that, she said, "I get it. I thought if you're talking about that one time, I'll compensate you for that one time. I've saved Ling Ling a couple of times. I don't think it's worth it." Chapter 450. 450. Lin Xiao understood what the man meant by his words just now. She didn't expect him to find out that she was Lu Tianyu so soon, even though she was in Lu Tianyu's body. However, she was Lu Tianyu now. So, she had to take responsibility for everything that woman had done before. Wu Qingyue's smile grew bigger as he nodded and said, "Yes, you're right. According to what you said, it does cancel out the fact that you kidnapped Ling Ling to threaten me. But there's one more thing that you didn't do, and that is my innocence." While speaking, he stared at Lin Xiao with a strange light sparkling in his eyes. Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. If he had shouted the last sentence at her, she might have really believed him. But what was the meaning of the other party's scheming smile? Did he think that she couldn't tell that he was trying to trick her? She finally put the glass on the table and said with a faint smile, "I think that as an adult man, you should be open-minded about things like that. You're not a woman from hundreds of years ago. You have to take responsibility for what you've done. Besides, are you still a virgin?" Hearing that, Wu Qingyue's smile cracked a little. He quickly glanced at the ceiling, then adjusted his expression and looked at Lin Xiao. "I used to have a girlfriend, but I broke up with her 10 years ago. I've been keeping my chastity. Unlike some people." While speaking, he glanced at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao immediately felt that Lu Tianyu's body and identity made her seem shorter. She cursed in her head. Why the fuck did she have to run over to this woman? How unlucky. However, her expression didn't change. Her green eyes flashed. Her green eyes sparkled as she said with a faint smile, I'm just having fun. That's a little far from what we're talking about tonight. Since you think that I've saved Ling Ling 3 times. No, twice, but still can't clear your so-called innocence. Just tell me. What do you want? As long as it's not too difficult for me, I might be able to say yes. She knew that she would be at a disadvantage because of Lu Tianyu's identity, and she had already made it clear, but still, she left herself a way out. Wu Qingyue was too smart and might not be easy to fool. About that, said Wu Qingyue, I'll tell you when I think about it. What do you think? Do you want me to give you a long-term check? And then you can come and get it whenever you want? Wu Qingyue nodded and said, that's right. You can think of it that way if you wish. Lin Xiao looked at him with confusion. The other party actually didn't make a request. Although on the surface, it was said that he still owed him a request. He didn't know what he would ask for in the future. But the way he was talking about it now, it was obvious that he was giving her an invisible path behind her back. Moreover, the future situation was unpredictable. Who knew what kind of relationship they would develop in the future? In any case, it was unlikely that they would become friends. Lin Xiao wasn't unhappy about that answer. Such a request was better than him directly asking her to do something. She needed to have some leeway. She thought for a moment and nodded. Okay, then we'll talk about it when you wanna. Regardless of whether our relationship in the future is ordinary or bad, I will not refuse. Lin Xiao sighed in her head, thinking that she had come back to life. Yet he still had to deal with such a huge problem for this woman. He really didn't know if he was lucky or not. Or was it bad luck? She wouldn't be able to avoid that problem sooner or later, so she decided to face it directly now. Wu Qingyue looked at her and abruptly said, You really don't look like the same person as before. Lin Xiao looked at him in the eyes and suddenly sensed something. She asked, Is it that if I were still the same as before, you might not be able to talk to me calmly here? As she expected, Wu Qingyue blinked. He nodded and said, You're right. If you were still the same person as before, I wouldn't even look at you. Lin Xiao rolled her eyes and blurted out, Then don't look at me. She couldn't wait to see that. Seeing her roll her eyes, Wu Qingyue paused briefly. Her expression gave him a strange feeling in his heart. It was very novel and very strange. However, that feeling didn't make him dislike it. On the contrary, he was a little touched. He thought for a moment about what he wanted to talk about this time, then said, You and I didn't initiate this. It was an accident. You, and I don't need to take responsibility. But if I guessed right, you're pregnant, right? After saying that, he couldn't help but glance at Lin Xiao's belly. His eyes glowed with a strange light. Lin Xiao automatically put a hand on her belly and said unhappily, I know that even if you don't tell me, but I want to know how you got into the water. Also, how did you get into my space? Wu Qingyue raised his eyebrows and said, You need to ask the thing in your belly. She dragged me in when I wasn't paying attention. After that, she gave me a strange scent. That's why I got into the water in a daze. I'm the victim here. You can't blame me for that. Lin Xiao gave him a cold glance and said, If you didn't send Ling Ling to that place, how could you be dragged in by Viney? She was going to drag someone else in, but you bumped into her yourself. Hearing her last sentence, Wu Qingyue's expression froze slightly. For some reason, he suddenly felt unhappy. Why did her words sound so unpleasant to his ears? What did she mean? Was Viney going to find another man to do that with her? She wondered. How could that happen? Once that thought popped up in his mind, Wu Qingyue automatically rejected it in his heart. He refused to let that happen. Wu Qingyue stared at her and said, So, are you saying that you don't mind whoever it is? So, you won't mind if it's me, right? Lin Xiao responded blandly, It happened once, so I won't mind if it happens again. I didn't want to do it, but it was an irresistible situation. I had no choice. If it's someone else, she thought for a moment. If it was someone else, it would be the same. It didn't matter who it was, Wu Qingyue or some other man. To her, it didn't make a difference. Under that irresistible situation, she had no choice but to accept it. Sometimes some things happen suddenly, but the more you cared about it, the more it would affect your life. Therefore, you might as well accept it. That would make your life much easier. No one else can do that. Wu Qingyuan narrowed his eyes and abruptly interrupted her. His tone was somewhat displeased as he said, "Since you've already attacked me once, then you have to be responsible for me. So, you don't have the right to choose another man. You can only choose me." Lin Xiao paused briefly upon hearing his strong and domineering tone. Chapter 451. Lin Xiao stared at him with a strange expression and said, "Even if you had sex with me once, so what? You can't control me, right? Do I need you to tell me whether I choose someone else or not? What's more, if I need a man to help me level up, of course I want to choose a suitable person." After Wu Qingyue said those words, he regretted it. He didn't know why he suddenly felt an inexplicable anger and couldn't control himself. He was silent and looked at Lin Xiao without saying anything. He also realized the difference between Lin Xiao's current attitude and his. Wu Qingyue had already silently regarded Lin Xiao as his own person, but Lin Xiao didn't have this awareness. In her mind, there was nothing between the two of them. Even if it was just a physical relationship, it wouldn't change her mind at all, because she had always kept a distance from him like an ordinary business partner. They weren't even ordinary friends. If it wasn't for Lingling, the two of them probably wouldn't have such a deep connection. Lin Xiao looked at his silence and suddenly said, "Let's talk about our second relationship. Let's not talk about the fact that we were both tricked. Those who didn't know were innocent, so no one was wrong. What's more, you didn't lose anything. You just lost a bunch of little tadpoles. You clearly worked hard. Ahem, if it wasn't for you helping me level up, I think I would be the one who suffered." She couldn't help but look at the ceiling awkwardly and then stared at him. Wu Qingyue's eyes flashed. He didn't say anything and just looked at her eyes. He felt that when she said the words, "I'm clearly working hard," she seemed to have an awkward expression on her face. He didn't know if she knew that after her body was repaired, her membrane was broken again. He also didn't know if she would explode. He didn't know if she was aware of this. If she didn't know, she would definitely know in the future. In the future, she might blame it on him and say that he didn't tell her about this. But she also had the right to know. But if he said it now, would it directly push her to a position even further away than she was now? Wu Qingyue was considering this in his heart. Lin Xiao said, "If you want to make a fuss about the first time, I don't think I owe you anything. Lingling has already been returned to you. If I force myself on you, have you forgotten that you struck me with lightning? Although I didn't die that time, I wasn't much better off. Don't tell me that time when I got hit by your wall for nothing and later, when I helped you save Lingling, couldn't make up for it. Why are you so narrow-minded? You even bit my thigh. How should this be calculated? No matter how you look at it, I'm the one who's at a disadvantage." Why did Wu Qingyue feel that he was really a little narrow-minded after her calculation? He said weakly, "Didn't you just steal my zombie king's corpse cores?" As he spoke, he put the cup in his mouth, poured a mouthful into his mouth, and swallowed. He said with a smile, "The wine is very good. Do you really not want to try it?" Lin Xiao leaned on the back of the sofa, glanced at him, and said, "Since we've made it clear, then we don't owe each other anything. For Lingling's sake, I'm still being polite to you." As she finished speaking, she stood up and turned around to leave. But after 2 steps, she turned back. She picked up the bottle on the table that still had 80% of the wine left and disappeared in a flash. Wu Qingyue silently looked at the place where the bottle was taken, and then he saw the glass door open and then close, but he couldn't see the person who opened it. He silently said in his heart, "How can we not owe each other anything? You still owe me a baby. Do you think I'll forget this?" But looking at her attitude, Wu Qingyue also knew that he couldn't force her too much. If he forced her into a corner, she would leave this base with the baby in her belly and run away to the north and south of the river. Where would he find them? But Wu Qingyue didn't know that even if he didn't force her, she would still run away. After Lin Xiao took the bottle of wine into the space, she left. She went to the roof of the hotel, stood at the highest position, and roared towards the sky. Soon, several zombie leaders came from all directions. Lin Xiao changed the water in their bathtubs and let them sit in the bathtubs by themselves. She walked back and forth outside their bathtubs and said, "You can stay in the bathtubs until tomorrow morning. I'm going out to do something, and it may be a month or two before I come back. While I'm away, I'll ask Ming Ming to watch over you. You can go to her if you need anything." The zombie leaders looked at her and just nodded, accepting her order. They were not interested in where she was going and what she was going to do. After thinking for a while, Lin Xiao finally went to see her mother. Hearing the knock on the door, Mrs. Lin opened the door and looked at Lin Xiao with surprise. She hadn't seen her for days. Standing at the door, Mrs. Lin couldn't help but ask, "What? You're back?" Lin Xiao nodded. Mrs. Lin looked at Lin Xiao's eyes, wondering why her eyes were a little different. But she didn't care. She turned around and opened the door. "Do you want to come in? Do you have something to talk about?" Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to see her in the middle of the night. Lin Xiao nodded, then lifted his foot and walked in. She walked to the sofa in the room and sat down as if she was very familiar with him. After closing the door, Mrs. Lin turned around and walked over. "Did you come back so late at night? I heard from Lin Feng that you've been catching zombies to farm. I can't believe you can still do that," Mrs. Lin said with a smile, and was about to pour a glass of water for Lin Xiao. However, halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Lin Xiao had become a zombie and didn't seem to need to drink water. Mrs. Lin stopped and turned to look at her. "Well, do you want to drink water?" Lin Xiao shook her head with a smile and said, "My body doesn't need to replenish water because the supernatural energy and the zombie virus are maintaining my functions." Mrs. Lin doesn't understand and nods. "Oh, I see." She sat down and looked at Lin Xiao. "If you don't drink water, can you only eat raw meat? By the way, zombies eat human flesh. Is it really okay if you don't eat it?" Lin Xiao smiled and said, "You have to know that I'm different from ordinary zombies. Although human flesh may taste better to me, even if I don't eat it, I can eat other raw meat. I'll just change into a zombie's body and lived in another way. It doesn't mean that I have to become a zombie without humanity." Mrs. Lin breathed a sigh of relief and said, "No, I'm worried that it will affect your body if you don't eat human flesh." Chapter 452. Seeing that Mrs. Lin was worried about her health, Lin Xiao felt warm. She smiled and said, "I'm fine. I'm fine. And as you can see, my situation is getting better and better, isn't it? Although it's impossible for me to turn back into a human, we are not zombies who have lost our minds. We are just living in another identity and way. As long as I'm still alive, these are not problems." She comforted her mother and said. Mrs. Lin was still a little uneasy and said, "But if your identity is known by everyone, they will not accept it. They definitely won't accept it. What are you going to do if they make a fuss?" Lin Xiao said, "I have talked to Tianqing about this, but he doesn't know that I am Lin Xiao, so he has always regarded me as a zombie named Lu Tianyu. In his eyes, I am at most a mutually beneficial relationship with him. I can barely be regarded as an alternative partner." Mrs. Lin looked at her and said, "In that case, he won't trust you completely." That's right. Yuan Tianqing just regarded Lin Xiao as a strange zombie. He felt that Lin Xiao had been protecting them for some reason. So because of this, even if they were now in a cooperative relationship, he still kept a vigilance in his heart. After all, he didn't know that the current zombie Lu Tianyu was Lin Xiao. So from a normal person's point of view, although he wouldn't have the intention to harm others, he couldn't be without the heart to guard against others. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Yes, I saw his guard against me, so I drew a line with him and signed a treaty with him. So I plan for the worst situation of zombies in the future to make him relax his vigilance against me. Otherwise, when I try my best to help you, I can't let a guy who doesn't know the situation become a pig teammate to cheat me." When Mrs. Lin heard that she compared Yuan Tianqing to a pig teammate, she thought about Yuan Tianqing's image. The two were simply too different. However, she couldn't help but say with a smile, "Indeed, if your identity is not a zombie, it's not a big problem. Now only we know your identity, and those outsiders don't know. I'm afraid that if the human power in this base becomes stronger in the future, if your identity is exposed, can you still stay here? Lin Xiao said with a smile. Don't worry about this. Yuan Tianqing and I will divide this base into two parts. Therefore, in the future, we will not interfere in the territories of the humans. Therefore, we ask the humans not to interfere in our territories. Furthermore, I will train my zombie strength, my own strength and army. Believe me, my troops will be a strange army in the apocalypse. We won't attack humans, but we won't let humans bully us either. This was the decision she made after thinking about the future situation of these mutated zombies. So during this period of time, she searched for level 4 zombies to see if she could train an ordinary zombie army. These zombies didn't need to mutate, they didn't need to have humanity, and they didn't need to have memories. She would limit the amount of water that replenished them, because she suddenly found that her lake was now more powerful. Except for Xie Dong and Xin Yuzhen, who were affected by her when they were turned into zombies, Lu Jun and Elmar recovered their memories by themselves under the effect of her lake water. The zombie army that Lin Xiao wanted did not require them to recover their memories, because if his memories were restored, there might be many unpredictable changes that would occur. Mrs. Lin looks at her in surprise and says, I didn't expect you to think so far ahead, but she soon realizes that Lin Xiao is such a person. She nods and says, okay, I think you're used to leading soldiers. Even if you become a zombie, you still want to build a zombie army. However, in order to survive in this era, having a strong army is also very necessary. Mrs. Lin sighs and continues to ask, how many have you caught now? You arranged zombies on the 5th floor of the hotel, right? It seems that you sent some to guard outside? Lin Xiao nods and says, yes, except for Tong Tong, they are all zombies. Moreover, they were all high-level zombies with strong human nature and control abilities. I've sent those inhumane zombie leaders who don't have strong control outside to guard the entrance. Mrs. Lin nods and says, oh. Lin Xiao then talks about the purpose of tonight's visit, but I will leave for a while tomorrow. I may not come back for a month or two. So, don't go to the 5th floor and don't go out of the wall of zombies. If anything happens, go to the 5th floor and find Meng Meng. She has recovered her memories. So, don't be afraid of her. Mrs. Lin looks at Lin Xiao in surprise. Meng Meng? Was it the girl who looked very young like a middle school student but had a childish air, and half of her face had strange scales growing out of it? Has she recovered her memories? They were no strangers to Meng Meng. Lin Xiaolu used to bring Tong Tong along to play with her. At first, they were worried that this strange zombie would suddenly go crazy and attack Xiaolu and Tong Tong. But later, they found that Meng Meng is actually very innocent when she is with the children. Lin Xiao nods. Yes, that's her. Mrs. Lin asks, you said you will leave for a month or two. Where are you going? Lin Xiao looks at her and says after thinking for a while, I'm going to Pluto's base and find the place where I lost my memories. Mrs. Lin stares at her for a few seconds and says, you're going back to Pluto's base? But isn't it dangerous? Yang Jianhua and the leader of the base are there. What if you meet them? Lin Xiao says, Mom, don't worry. I will avoid them. I have no memory of them now. Even if I meet them, I won't be excited. Besides, they won't recognize me now, so I don't need to be afraid. Besides, I have the space. It's easy for me to escape. Hearing her confidence, Mrs. Lin nodded, although she was still a little uneasy. She knows her daughter well. As long as Lin Xiao decides to do something, she will think of many ways to do it. So, even if Mrs. Lin wants to stop her, she won't listen. After thinking for a while, Mrs. Lin asks, do you want to see if you can recover your memories? But it's strange that you can recover other people's memories. Why can't you recover your own? Lin Xiao says, I don't know. I always feel that I lost something in the south. So, I'm going to find it. Maybe I can recover my memories if I find it. Mrs. Lin finally understood and said, I see. Chapter 453. Lin Xiao said, I'm just here to tell you. I'm afraid that you will be worried if you don't see me for a while. Mrs. Lin looks at her, sighs, and says, but you are going so far, and it's such a dangerous place. I'm worried about you too. Lin Xiao said, don't worry. I brought Lily with me. I believe that we can work together unless we encounter more than 3 level 7 paranormals. Otherwise, we won't have a problem. Mrs. Lin could only nod. Well, anyway, be careful and come back, okay? Don't be like last time. Speaking of this, Mrs. Lin suddenly becomes silent. Lin Xiao called her again. Mom, don't worry. I'll be careful for you. Mrs. Lin looked at her and couldn't say anything else. Lin Xiao stood up and said, I'll go to the roof first. Mrs. Lin stood up and walked her to the door. After Lin Xiao walked out, she stood at the door and watched her leave. Lin Xiao turned around and glanced at her mother before heading upstairs. She didn't show up because she wanted to avoid Wu Qingyue. Now that she has talked to Wu Qingyue, there is no need to hide. When she got to the roof, she lay on the roof of the stairwell. There is a mat made by Qiu Lily, so Lin Xiao lies on it and looks at the sky. The night sky after doomsday is dark. There are no stars and no moon. It's not that there are no stars, but it is covered by the dust and miasma in the air. The night wind is very cold. Lin Xiao can't feel the cold like a human being, but she can still feel a trace of coolness, which is just right for her. She lies on the bed for the whole night. Lin Xiao directly turns over and shouts to the zombie leaders who have been soaking in the buckets all night. Get up, get up. It's dawn. It's time. As soon as she speaks, the zombie leaders immediately climb out of the buckets. Even the old man who slept for the whole night climbs out of the buckets by himself. Then he leisurely puts on his middle-aged and old Tang suit. After they put on their clothes, Lin Xiao doesn't need to say anything. They all turn around and jump out from the side of the building and go to their own area. Lin Xiao poured the black mist into the bucket that they had been soaking in. Then, he watched as the water turned into black mist and rose into the air. When the bucket was empty, Lin Xiao waved his hand. He sucked in the black fog. Then, she turned around and hid herself. In a flash, she rushed out in the direction of West Lake and leaped over the roofs of buildings. After getting out of the zombies' encirclement, she landed on a road a few kilometers away from the base. Then, with a wave of his hand, an ordinary black off-road vehicle appeared on the road, surrounded by abandoned cars. Lin Xiao took out her sunglasses and put them on. Then, she sat in the driver's seat. She did not ask Qiu Lily to come out. She knew that Qiu Lily did not like the dust on the road, so she had to drive alone. The car drove along the Xinjiang River to the Xihu district. When they were near the Hangzhou Zoo, Lin Xiao slowed down. She stopped the car at an intersection and got out. Then, he released Ao Wang. Roar Wu. As soon as Ao Wang came out and found himself in a strange environment, he immediately raised his head and roared. It was as if he was notifying the surrounding animals that he was coming. Lin Xiao did not release the giant snake because it had not matured yet. At least, it was not dependent on the lake water that she had given him. So, she could not let it out, because once she let it out, it would definitely run away. Roar. However, after Ao Wang's roar, there was a sudden burst of roars coming from the surrounding forest. Lin Xiao's location was actually not at the zoo yet, but from the sounds, it was obvious that the area had been occupied by those animals. This had always been a forbidden area in Hangzhou. Lin Xiao lifted her leg and kicked Ao Wang, who was beside her. What are you shouting for? Are you afraid that they won't know that we have invaded their territory? Roar, roar. Ao Wang was immediately excited when he heard the responses of so many animals. Although he did not understand what they were roaring about, the response meant that there was prey. Lin Xiao put the car in her space and walked toward the zoo. But before she could go far, a huge bird flapped its wings and flew towards her from the sky. Lin Xiao looked up and saw that it was a giant red-crowned crane. But the crane looked a little fierce. A huge bird with a white body and a black tail was in the sky. When it spread its wings and flew toward Lin Xiao, it was about 4 to 5 meters wide. It was huge, and its claws were thick and long. But its elegant appearance had now become a little terrifying. Its slender legs had become very thick and powerful. The hooks on its claws were shining with a cold light and were sharper than the claws of an eagle. There were also a few horns on the red crown on its head. There were also some hard scales growing on the sides of his mouth. His eyes were sharp, and there was a fierce and vicious aura in his eyes. Lin Xiao sighed when she saw the fierce red-crowned crane taking the initiative to attack. Even red-crowned cranes had become so fierce after the changes of the apocalypse. Roar! The red-crowned crane opened its mouth and roared ferociously. It was very fast, and because of its size, it rushed toward Lin Xiao with a gust of wind. Obviously, its target was Lin Xiao, and it did not seem to be interested in the zombie dog beside her. Lin Xiao stood there calmly and watched it rush out. She stared at it without dodging or avoiding it. Roar! The zombie dog retreated 2 steps to the side. As the red-crowned crane charged down, it flapped its wings furiously, instantly increasing its speed by a notch. In the blink of an eye, it extended its legs and grabbed Lin Xiao's head at lightning speed. When Lin Xiao saw that it was about to grab her head, she suddenly tilted her head and moved her hands. She quickly attacked with both of her hands and grabbed the crane's 2 thick and long ankles. She followed the force of the red-crowned crane's charge and slammed its legs on the ground. Then she swung her hands to the side. She swung it towards the zombie dog that was already prepared. Roar! The zombie dog immediately pounced forward and pounced on the red-crowned crane with its claws and teeth. Chirp! The giant red-crowned crane did not expect its prey to dodge its attack and even grab its leg. Before he could even react, he was slapped to the ground with a bang, and with a shake, he fainted. Before it could react, the zombie dog pounced on it, roared, and bit its head with its mouth wide open. Then it fiercely swung its head. Splat! The red-crowned crane's head was cleanly torn off by the bird's mouth. Red blood splattered everywhere. The headless crane was still flapping its wings and struggling with its legs. But it was firmly held down by the zombie dog. Chapter 454. Why did you bite off its head? I wanted to catch it alive. Lin Xiao looked at the headless crane and then at Ah Wang, who was chewing on the crane's head. She was speechless. Crunch! Ah Wang chewed on a bloody crane head and looked up at her. Lin Xiao sighed. All right, forget it. It's such a big one anyway. That stupid snake can't swallow it. But it doesn't seem to eat dead ones. I'll have to catch a smaller one for it later. This one is too big. She looked at the crane's body, which was slowly becoming motionless. Then, she flashed her claws. Take your claws away. I'm going to skin the bird. The feathers are pretty good. I'll take them. Then, she pushed the zombie dog to the side and began to skin the crane's skin. She had already mastered the skill of skinning living creatures without bleeding, so she began to peel the bird's skin with familiarity. The layer of fibrous tissue under the feathers was carefully cut open with her fingertips. Then, she pulled out the skin along with the skin. Moreover, this crane was very big. Lin Xiao circled around it for an hour before he managed to peel off its feathers and skin without bleeding. Then, all that was left was the bird's body. She took a big bucket and divided the bird into 2 halves. She threw one half to Ah Wang and stored the other half in the bucket. She looked up at the sky and saw that the sun had come out. Lin Xiao spread the bird's skin on the grass by the side of the road. Then, she sat on a rock under a tree and dragged the bucket of bird meat to eat. She tore off the meat piece by piece and chewed it in her mouth. The tenderness and sweetness of the raw meat, as well as the sweet taste of blood, made Lin Xiao unable to stop eating. The zombie dog dragged the other half of the bird meat, which was about the same size as it, to the other side of the grass and gnawed on it with relish. While Lin Xiao was happily eating the meat, on the other side of the road, a group of soldiers went around the West Lake and headed for the uptown area. More than 20 war chariots similar to the one Yang Jianhua had driven before were rumbling over majestically. In a luxurious limousine in the middle, Long Yubai's slender right leg was crossed over his left. He sat lazily on the sofa in the car, holding a glass of red wine in his hand, but his face was looking out the window. Her watery eyes flashed with a faint cold light. Looking at the desolate scene outside the window, he was thinking about Yang Jianhua. Before he came out, he gave the level 6 corpse core to Yang Jianhua. Yang Jianhua thought that he didn't want to give it to him. In fact, he just didn't want to give it to him so easily. He had plenty of level 6 corpse cores in his hands, so why would he care about that one? He just wanted to let Yang Jianhua know that he had to get some benefits from him. It wasn't that easy to make him recognize the price he had to pay. A cold glint flashed across his eyes, and he poured the cup in his hand into his pale lips. Let's find a place to rest first. After drinking a mouthful of red wine, he said in the direction of the first car. Yes. The man in the front passenger seat looked back at him and replied. Not long after, the convoy stopped at a square in front of them. Long Yubai lazily leaned on the sofa and faintly said, I've been sitting in the car for so long. My waist and legs are sore. Alin, come and help me massage it. Yes. The man in the front passenger seat looked back at Long Yubai with a happy expression. Then, he looked at the driver, who opened the door and got off. The man in the front passenger seat also got off, but he quickly opened the back door and strode into the carriage Long Yubai was in. After closing the door, he smiled and said, What's wrong, Xiao Bai? You've been sitting for so long. Are you lonely? The man was very tall, nearly 1.9 meters. His body was very sturdy, and his explosive muscles propped up his clothes. Saying that, he leaned against Long Yubai and sat down next to him. Then, he took the cup from Long Yubai's hand and put it on the cabinet. Then, he touched Long Yubai's waist with one hand. Long Yubai might have drunk some wine. The alcohol made his eyes and face a little red. He turned around and glanced at the man from the corner of his eye, then shifted his gaze away. The man couldn't help but swallow his saliva and stared at him with bright eyes. Then, he suddenly reached out and pinched Long Yubai's chin. He pressed his face down and fiercely kissed Long Yubai's lips. He knew that when Long Yubai said to massage him, he actually wanted him to do it and then serve him comfortably. Long Yubai let the man in front of him bite his lips. He slightly narrowed his eyes and seemed to be in a daze. But he actually didn't want to open his eyes to see the man's face. It wasn't that the man was ugly. The man in front of him didn't look ugly. His facial features weren't delicate enough, and he couldn't be considered handsome. But he had a style, and his muscles were what Long Yubai liked. He was one of his deputies, and also one of the deputy leaders of the Earth Dragon base. Although he wasn't the kind of handsome man he liked, his ability was what he needed. There were many capable men at the end of the world. But a man who was handsome, had a good figure, and was capable. But not many. Long Yubai was obsessed with looks, so he would indulge Yang Jianhua. This time, he wanted to go to East China and told Yang Jianhua that he was going to find trouble with the Lin family. But in fact, he heard that the leader of Sea City, Wu Qingyue, was a very handsome man. Not only was he the leader, but he was also the leader of the Sea City base. He was a rare thunder ability user and was very powerful. He had long wanted to meet such a man. Soon, the car began to shake. The soldiers outside the car ignored it and stared at the periphery as if they hadn't noticed anything. Softer. A soft moaning sound came from the car, and the people around were already used to it. The tremor lasted for 2 hours. When the two finally stopped, Long Yubai got out of the car with his face full of sweat and clothes in disarray. Then, he walked to the bathroom that his subordinates had prepared for him. His men found a clean room for him and prepared a large bucket filled with hot water that was giving off smoke. There was also a set of clothes neatly placed next to it. After Long Yubai entered, he saw that there were 20 to 30 guards standing guard outside the room. This was to prevent someone from suddenly breaking in and disturbing him while he was bathing. After waiting for half an hour, Long Yubai came out feeling refreshed. Then he returned to the car that had been shaking for 2 hours. Then, the convoy quickly retreated and left. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.